Chapter 699. Why is Chu Luiyue here? This question quickly flashed through Jiang Yuqing's mind. He only remembered that after he was dragged down, the entrance above was completely sealed. He didn't know what happened to the others. Could it be that he was the only one who encountered this? If not, why would Chu Luiyue be standing here perfectly fine? She didn't seem to have any injuries at all, and her entire body was clean. However, looking at Chu Luiyue's smiling face, Jiang Yuqing couldn't help but heave a sigh of relief in his heart. He looked around. Other than Chu Luiyue, there seemed to be a few other people in the distance. And a huge, colorful barrier. Sensing the terrifying fluctuations coming from the barrier, Jiang Yuqing suddenly realized something and widened his eyes. That's a 9th grade magical beast? There was no other explanation for such a commotion other than a 9th grade magical beast. Chu Luiyue didn't avoid it and nodded frankly. Eldest young Master Jiang has good eyesight. Jiang Yuqing immediately wanted to go over, but he suddenly remembered that half of his body was still buried below and he couldn't break free. Chu Luiyue smiled and asked knowingly, "Eldest young Master Jiang, what's wrong with you?" Jiang Yuqing's face was red and white. When he thought of his current sorry state, his face burned with pain. He couldn't be seen by anyone, but it had to be Chu. Moreover, she looked fine, which made him even more unbearable to look at. Jiang Yuqing had always cared about his face. In the face of such a situation, he only felt embarrassed and wished he hadn't come out from below. He waved the saber in his hand and slashed at the tree roots that were tightly wrapped around him, trying to break free. Only then did Chu Luiyue see that many tree roots had penetrated his body, leaving scars. As expected, this one Yeshan had indeed swallowed Jiang Yuqing's blood. With his current physical condition, how could he withstand such torture? Looking at that ghastly pale face, Chu Luiyue admired his rare miserable appearance for a while, and her mood improved a lot. What was all this? It was not even a tenth of the pain she had experienced. If he couldn't make Jiang Yuqing repay him in every possible way, how could he dispel the hatred in his heart? As if sensing Chu Luiyue's strange gaze, Jiang Yuqing finally glanced at her again with a slight frown. Before he could speak, Chu Luiyue spoke first. "Eldest young Master Jiang, you seem to be seriously injured. Do you need my help?" Jiang Yuqing swallowed the words in his throat. For some reason, he felt that Chu Luiyue's expression was somewhat subtle. It looked like he really wanted to help. However, his black jade-like eyes were flickering with light, making it hard for others to fathom his intentions. Jiang Yuqing was silent for a moment, then looked at the cut on the tree root and asked, "You did that?" Chu Luiyue gently nodded. "I heard a sound here, so I came over to take a look. I just happened to see this tree root moving. I felt that this thing was really strange, so I tried to stab it with a knife. I didn't expect to see eldest young Master Jiang here." Her tone was very sincere. Jiang Yuqing believed her a little. It wasn't easy for him to find a way out. At this time, the force in his body was almost exhausted. He had to get out of here as soon as possible and find a place to recuperate. However, this tree root was really difficult to deal with. As he tried to break free, he asked, "Why are you here? Other than you, who are those people? Where are the others?" The corners of Chu Luiyue's mouth curled up imperceptibly. Jiang Yuqing was still worried about her and wanted to ask for an explanation. "Eldest young Master Jiang, it's a long story. Let's wait for you to come out before we talk about it in detail. Why don't I help you? What do you think?" Jiang Yuqing saw that it was really difficult to rely on himself, so he could only nod. Chu Luiyue took a step forward. "Just cut off these tree roots," Jiang Yuqing said. Chu Luiyue agreed easily and raised the dagger in her hand. As the tree roots moved, Jiang Yuqing's body was also dragged out more. Almost only a pair of legs were left, still buried inside. Chu Luiyue glanced out of the corner of her eye. Boom! The third Tianlei fell. A series of loud noises reverberated throughout the entire forest. Layers of dark clouds covered the sky and the sun, and the forest was dark. Chu Luiyue deliberately used her body to block Jiang Yuqing. In addition, there were thick tree roots and other objects here, which covered Jiang Yuqing even more. Even Chang Wanzhou, who had been looking over, couldn't see what was happening here. Accompanied by the terrifying aftermath, a dazzling light flickered endlessly. It reflected on Jiang Yuqing's face, half bright and half dark. Chu Luiyue stretched out her hand. There was only a step between the two of them at this moment. As long as she waved her hand, the dagger could easily slit Jiang Yuqing's throat. Surging hatred and killing intent surged from the bottom of her heart. A cold light flashed in Chu Luiyue's eyes. The blade turned slightly, and the cold light was biting cold. Jiang Yuqing was dealing with a tree root wrapped around his chest and didn't notice this side. All of the grudges, hatred, it could be ended in an instant. Chu Luiyue moved her wrist. Crush. Just as Chu Luiyue was about to move, a tree not far away suddenly uprooted. It split from the middle. Broken wood splattered everywhere. A figure rushed out. Chu Luiyue quickly glanced at it, and her pupils constricted. It was Mu Qinghe. At the same time, Jiang Yuqing was also attracted by the movement and looked over. After seeing the person clearly, he immediately shouted, "Vice Admiral Mu." Mu Qinghe had just broken free from the restraints and rushed out from below. Hearing this, she immediately looked up. The person half buried in the ground was Jiang Yuqing, and the woman beside him. He narrowed his eyes. Why was it Chu Luiyue? Sensing Mu Qinghe's gaze, Chu Luiyue's expression didn't change. She flipped her palm and stabbed out with the dagger. A section of the tree root was immediately cut off by Chu Luiyue. Red liquid splattered. At the same time, a cold wind came from behind. It was the other root of the tree that suddenly rose up. It was aimed at Chu Luiyue's back. Her plan was suddenly interrupted. At this time, Chu Luiyue was in a bad mood. Sensing this movement, her face turned cold. She quickly turned around and raised her hand. A ball of red flame transformed into a long whip and flew out instantly. The sound of something breaking through the air was heard. The flame whip immediately entangled with the tree root. However, the strength of the tree root couldn't be underestimated. With a fierce struggle, it directly pulled Chu Luiyue and caused her to stagger. Chu Luiyue simply rolled on the ground, and the force in her body surged out violently. Boom! The flame burned even more fiercely. The entire tree root was instantly surrounded by the red flame. The flame spread rapidly and soon enveloped the entire tree. Chu Luiyue coldly spat out a word, "Explode." Bang! The sturdy Wan Yeshan immediately exploded. At this time, Mu Qinghe had already rushed over. With her help, Jiang Yuqing finally broke free. "Eldest young master, are you okay?" Mu Qinghe frowned and asked. Jiang Yuqing didn't answer her. He only stared blankly at Chu Luiyue in front of him. Just now, she really saved him. Boom. Chu Luiyue looked at the burning flame in front of her, and the hand holding the dagger slowly tightened. What a pity! Digression. There was some delay in the morning. The remaining chapters will be updated at 8 p.m. Updated. Thank you for your understanding. Moi mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from Love Network. Chapter 700. Chu Luiyue was unhappy, but when she turned around, the expression on her face had returned to normal. Vice Admiral Mu. She greeted Mu Qinghe very politely. It was a pity that she couldn't get rid of Jiang Yuqing directly this time, but thinking about it carefully, she still felt a little reluctant to kill him like this. Wouldn't it be too easy to die with a knife? There's still a long way to go. It's better to let young Master Jiang enjoy his life. As Chu Luiyue thought about it, she openly sized up Jiang Yuqing from head to toe, as if she was concerned and sympathetic. Young Master Jiang, I don't think your current condition is very good. Why don't you recuperate as soon as possible? Jiang Yuqing was originally staring at Chu Luiyue's back in a daze, but when she spoke, he suddenly came back to his senses. Sensing that Chu Luiyue's gaze was sweeping back and forth over his body, Jiang Yuqing felt inexplicably embarrassed in his heart. His battered and exhausted appearance was completely seen by her. He coughed to cover up his embarrassment. I have medicine. As he spoke, he took out a pill and swallowed it. Mu Qinghe watched from the side. She felt that there was something wrong with Jiang Yuqing, but she couldn't put her finger on it. It was probably because of what he had just experienced. Anyone who had walked around the line between life and death would probably feel some lingering fear. Jiang Yuqing looked at Chu Luiyue with a complicated gaze. Just now? Thank you. For a moment, he almost thought that Chu Luiyue wanted to kill him. But everything that happened later proved that this was just a misunderstanding. He had always been a suspicious person and wouldn't easily trust anyone, especially when it was a matter of life and death. Chu Luiyue's unreserved help was greatly beyond his expectations. Young Master Jiang, you're too polite. Chu Luiyue smiled faintly, as if she didn't take this matter to heart. Jiang Yuqing was silent for a while before he spoke again. I owe you one this time. Mu Qinghe suddenly glanced at him, a rare look of surprise flashing through her eyes, as if she hadn't expected him to say this. This person had always been vicious and merciless, cold-hearted and heartless. In the past few years, who knew how many people had sacrificed their lives for him, but he had never once spared them a single glance. Why did he take the initiative to say that he owed Chu Luiyue a favor? Could it be that he intended to befriend Chu Luiyue? From what had happened during this period of time, Chu Luiyue's talent and strength were extraordinary. He was indeed worth befriending. On the surface, Chu Luiyue appeared to be very modest. He repeatedly said that he did not dare, but in fact, there was not the slightest ripple in his heart. She had seen Jiang Yuqing's dog-like behavior too many times. In this world, there was probably no one who knew better than her what kind of shocking level this man could bring to two-faced people. When he handed her tea, he always had a gentle and elegant smile on his face, but in the end she found out that under the mask of that smile, it was all poison. Chu Luiyue did not take this matter to heart. She treated Jiang Yuqing's somewhat complicated gaze as a joke. In fact, she was more interested in Mu Qinghe. Vice Admiral Mu, why did you suddenly come out from that side just now? Mu Qinghe's face was expressionless as usual. We encountered an accident earlier, and everyone fell into a ravine. It took me a lot of effort to escape. As he spoke, he looked at Chu Luiyue and frowned. Why did you, Lu Yu? Before Mu Qinghe could finish, he was interrupted by Mu Hongyu's voice. Chu Luiyue looked back and saw that Chang Wanzhou and the rest were actually here. Chang Wanzhou was at the front and was the fastest. Mu Hongyu and Yi Ranran were slightly behind, but they also looked worried. Although Lei Laosi was still guarding there, he kept looking over here. After all, the commotion just now was not small. Chu Luiyue smiled and shook her head. I'm fine. Mu Hongyu and the rest were relieved when they saw that she was indeed not injured. She turned and looked at Jiang Yuqing and Mu Qinghe. Mu Qinghe was fine, but Jiang Yuqing's body was covered in black mud. He was covered in wounds and blood, and his face was pale. He looked very disheveled. Mu Hongyu frowned and covered her nose. What's that smell? It was as if something was rotting, and it was mixed with a thick bloody smell that made one feel nauseous. Jiang Yuqing's face turned from white to green, and the veins on his forehead were still throbbing. Yi Ranran secretly pulled Mu Hongyu and gave her a look. Isn't this smell coming from Jiang Yuqing's body? Wouldn't it be embarrassing for Jiang Yuqing if she said that? Mu Hongyu then realized it and shut her mouth. She glanced at Chu Luiyue. I seem to have offended someone? However, Chu Luiyue's expression was normal, and when he looked back at her, he had a relieved expression. Also, there seemed to be a hint of satisfaction in his eyes. Mu Hongyu was a little confused. Luyu doesn't seem to mind this very much. Why do I feel like I'm being affirmed? Mu Hongyu thought for a while and couldn't figure it out, so she threw this matter to the back of her mind. I'll listen to Luyu. If Luyu says it's fine, then it's definitely fine. Chu Luiyue stared at Jiang Yuqing's face a few more times. In the entire Tianling dynasty, who would dare to ridicule Jiang Yuqing in front of him? Only a simple-minded person like Mu Hongyu would do such a thing. Chu Luiyue praised in his heart. Well done. Jiang Yuqing won't be able to put on airs for a long time in the future. Mu Qinghe looked at them and frowned even more. Are you all here? You weren't dragged down? Chu Luiyue nodded honestly. During the riot, my magical beast suddenly ran away, so I chased after it. The rest of them followed me. Later, when we found the magical beast and wanted to go back, we realized, that you guys were no longer here. We decided to stay here and wait for an opportunity to meet up with the main group. Chu Lue casually brushed the matter aside and asked, "Why? Weren't you all together at the beginning? Why did you all split up?" Mu Qinghe, Shangguan Wan, Jiang Yuqing, and the others had always been together. Even they had split up, let alone the others. Mu Qinghe's face was a little cold. The situation happened too suddenly. If he didn't have a certain understanding of the mystic forest and knew how to deal with Wan Yeshan, he would probably still be trapped in that swamp. I see. I wonder how the others are now. Chu Luiyue looked around as if he wanted to see if anyone would come out again. Mu Qinghe and Jiang Yuqing didn't say anything. How could they answer this? Based on the situation of the swamp below, it would be difficult to escape. They had just entered the mystic forest, and they had encountered such a thing. It was obvious that more than 1,000 people had died. Mu Qinghe rarely suffered such a big loss, so naturally, she wasn't in a good mood. Boom! Another bolt of heavenly lightning struck. Jiang Yuqing finally came back to his senses and looked up with a serious expression. Is that a 9th grade magical beast that is about to break through? Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from the Love Network. Chapter 701. Jiang Yuqing's tone was filled with bewilderment, but his eyes were filled with unconcealable surprise. It was obvious that he didn't expect that he would end up here after walking on the edge of life and death. He bumped into the 9th grade fiend that was going through Tunlei. Previously, he had been thinking about it, but now that he saw it as soon as he raised his eyes, how could he not be happy? Chu Luiyue nodded calmly. They were already here, and Tianlei kept falling. Even a fool could tell what the situation was now. Jiang Yuqing got up and wanted to walk forward. Chu Luiyue raised his brows slightly. Lei Laosi was guarding over there, and it would be a miracle if Jiang Yuqing could go over safely. With his current ability, he probably couldn't even last 10 moves under Lei Laosi's hands. It was Mu Qinghe who stopped him. "Eldest young master, it's very dangerous over there. Let's wait and see first." Jiang Yuqing was a little displeased. Chu Luiyue and the rest came from there just now, but they couldn't go over now? It was already embarrassing enough. If they continued to hide here, wouldn't they seem even more cowardly? Jiang Yuqing didn't listen and continued walking forward. However, he just took 2 steps when a burning pain suddenly came from his lower abdomen. Jiang Yuqing's face turned pale instantly, and he staggered and almost fell to the ground. Mu Qinghe immediately went forward to support him and frowned. "Eldest young master, what's wrong?" Due to the intense pain, Jiang Yuqing's forehead was filled with sweat, and his lips were trembling slightly. He couldn't say a word. He had felt this a few times before, but it was never as painful as this time. It was as if a flame directly penetrated his lower abdomen and entered his dantian. It was also the first time Mu Qinghe saw Jiang Yuqing like this, and she thought that he was injured by Wan Yeshan's roots just now. "Eldest young master, you should rest for a while first. Your body is more important." Even if Jiang Yuqing wanted to refuse, he couldn't say anything now. Chu Luiyue glanced at him indifferently. Jiang Yuqing barely managed to sit cross-legged when he felt the pain quickly disappear. However, the bone-piercing pain lingered in his mind for a long time. A trace of worry and fear finally appeared in Jiang Yuqing's heart. This time, it might be a coincidence. What about twice? What about the 3rd time? There was definitely something wrong with his body. But no matter how he thought about it, he still couldn't figure out what was going on. Back then, that Xia Mu had only used a brush to leave a bloody hole in his body. In fact, it wasn't a serious injury. As long as he recuperated well, he would recover very quickly. However, even after some time had passed, the wounds still did not heal. And from time to time, there would be this strange burning pain. However, Jiang Yuqing didn't dare to expose this in front of outsiders. He could only nod briefly and say nothing more. Chu Luiyue suddenly felt a little itchy on her neck. She turned her head and saw Dumpling pulling her hair and wagging its tail, as if it wanted to go back. She didn't know what was over there that made it yearn for it so much. Chu Luiyue patted its head comfortingly and looked at Jiang Yuqing. "Eldest young master Jiang, Why don't you rest here first? We'll go and see how that 9th-grade demonic beast is doing. The third princess came here this time for the divine beast's blood. Wouldn't it be a pity to miss it? Jiang Yuqing wanted to go by himself. However, he really couldn't do anything in his current state. He could only nod and look at Mu Qinghe. You should go with them. Mu Qinghe was stronger, so she would definitely be more confident if she went. Chu Liyue's eyelids twitched, but she didn't say anything. Eldest young master's body? Mu Qinghe seemed to be a little hesitant. Just go ahead. I know how my body is. Jiang Yuqing's expression became a little more solemn. Mu Qinghe didn't hesitate anymore and immediately agreed. Yes. Chu Liyue's lips curled up. With Vice Admiral Mu around, we'll be more confident. Mu Qinghe's expression was cold as she followed them forward. Hearing that Chu Liyue and the rest were back, Lei Laosi turned around to take a look. With this glance, she saw Mu Qinghe, who was following behind the few of them. Murderous intent surged out from Lei Laosi's eyes instantly. I didn't see her earlier, but I didn't expect her to be here. He gripped the hammer in his hand tightly, and the force around him surged. Mu Qinghe seemed to have noticed something and suddenly raised his head to take a look. The two of them looked at each other. Mu Qinghe immediately felt the other party's intense murderous intent. It was as though he was going to attack the next moment. He furrowed his brows slightly. Who is this person? Why does he seem to have a deep hatred for me? Before Mu Qinghe could think too much, a figure suddenly walked in front of her and blocked her line of sight. It was Chu Liyue. Mu Qinghe's gaze landed on Chu Liyue. However, Chu Liyue seemed to have no intention of doing so as he shouted at the man in front of him. Big brother Lei. Hearing this, Lei Laosi suddenly returned to his senses, and the murderous aura in his eyes was restrained. However, his expression still looked like he wasn't someone to be trifled with. Chu Liyue walked to him and smiled. Big brother Lei, don't worry. This is Vice Admiral Mu that I mentioned to you just now. He came with us, and he has no ill intentions. Lei Laosi looked at Chu Liyue suspiciously. Her words seem like she's trying to hide something? Chu Liyue then looked at Mu Qinghe and explained, Vice Admiral Mu Qinghe, Vice Admiral Mu Qinghe. Vice Admiral Mu, this is Lei Laosi, Big brother Lei. He's in charge of protecting this 9th-grade fiend. Lei Laosi instantly understood Chu Liyue's plan. Is she trying to help me hide my identity? It's true that I can't expose myself in front of Mu Qinghe now, but how did Chu Liyue see through it? Many doubts arose in Lei Laosi's heart. He turned his gaze and fixed it in a certain direction before swiftly retracting it. He took a deep breath and kept the resentment in his heart. Then he glanced coldly at Mu Qinghe and scoffed. Another one who wants to join in the fun? I don't care if you're a lieutenant general or not. All of you, stand 10 steps away and are not allowed to come close. Mu Qinghe looked at his ferocious appearance and then at the gigantic colorful barrier behind him as she narrowed her eyes. Why would a human be in charge of guarding a 9th-grade fiend? However, this Lei Laosi does seem to have some ability, and he's obviously moving more freely than us in this area filled with terrifying suppression. It's obvious that he's been here for a long time, and he might really be related to that 9th-grade fiend. Chu Liyue smiled and said, Don't worry. Don't worry, we're just here to watch. We won't do anything. Vice Admiral Mu, don't you think so? Mu Qinghe paused for a moment and nodded. Lei Laosi scoffed. Now is the crucial moment, and there mustn't be any mistakes. Mu Qinghe, it's not too late to deal with her in the future. Just as he was about to turn around, his gaze suddenly focused on a figure far away. Who is that person? Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from Love Network. Chapter 702. Chu Liyue thought that he saw Jiang Yuqing and was about to speak when she suddenly heard a panting voice from behind. Vice Admiral Mu? Recognizing the identity of the owner of this voice, Chu Liyue knitted her brows slightly, and a hint of annoyance appeared in the corners of her eyes. She lazily turned around to take a look. It was indeed Elder Qiushi. At this moment, he looked rather disheveled. Half of his body was stained with black mud, and his face was even scratched by something. Fresh blood flowed down, and he looked a little terrifying. He was only slightly better than Jiang Yuqing. Mu Qinghe walked forward. Elder Qiushi, are you here? I didn't seem to hear anything just now. Elder Qiushi hurriedly stepped forward and grabbed his arm as he asked anxiously, What's the matter? He hurriedly asked, Vice Admiral Mu, have you seen the third princess? Elder Qiushi did not deliberately lower his voice when he said this. Chu Liyue's eyelashes trembled slightly. Murderous intent flashed past Lei Laoxi's eyes. The others also quietened down. Mu Qinghe knitted her brows and shook her head. Elder Qiushi was extremely anxious. What should we do? What should we do? Elder Qiushi, don't be anxious. What exactly happened? Weren't you always with Her Highness previously? Elder Qiushi and Elder Duanmu Chun were different from him. The two of them were here specifically to protect Shangguan. Even if Mu Qinghe and Jiang Yuqing weren't with Shangguan, these two elders should be by her side and never leave her side. Elder Qiushi took a deep breath, but his face was still filled with anxiety and nervousness. At the start, we did indeed fall into that gully with the third princess. I'm sure you know what happened down there, Vice Admiral Mu Qinghe nodded. Actually, there were quite a number of people who fell down at the same time, including some of the Black Cavalry and a few sect disciples. However, the swamp below was extremely dangerous. Many people fell into it and never came out again. Originally, we weren't too far away from His Highness. We planned to bring His Highness away, but then, for some reason, the swamp suddenly started to move. Elder Qiushi swallowed a mouthful of saliva with difficulty. When he recalled the scene back then, there was still a sense of horror in his heart. In the end, we were all separated. His Highness is also nowhere to be found. Even he had a hard time seizing the chance to escape. He had only come here because he had sensed the commotion. She immediately spotted Mu Qinghe. Because Elder Qiushi came directly from another direction, he didn't see Jiang Yuqing sitting on the other side in the distance. Vice Admiral Mu, you said His Highness. His Highness. Elder Qiushi's aged face was filled with worry. That place was extremely dangerous. He didn't know how long Shangguan could last. Mu Qinghe said in a deep voice. Elder Qiushi, don't worry. Since so many people are here, perhaps some of them are still with His Highness. Moreover, His Highness is blessed by the heavens. Nothing will happen to him. That's right. Her Highness the Third Princess is extremely powerful. Even if she really encounters any trouble, she will definitely be able to deal with it easily, right? A lazy and clear voice suddenly interrupted from the side. Elder Qiushi looked over in a daze. Only then did he clearly see that the person who spoke was actually Chu Liyue. Why are you here? Elder Qiushi felt extremely annoyed when he saw this face, and the expression on his face became much colder. Chu Liyue felt that it was ridiculous. She seemed to be the first to come to this place, right? Why were these people asking her this question now? Could it be that she, Chu Liyue, was not qualified to appear here? Chu Liyue said with a faint smile. Elder Qiushi, we have been here since the beginning. You were thinking about the third princess wholeheartedly, so it's normal that you didn't see us. However, your expression. Could it be that you feel that what I said just now was wrong? Elder Qiushi's face instantly flushed red. He knew a little about Shangguan's condition. Hence, when he heard Chu Liyue's words just now, he subconsciously felt that it was sarcastic. But thinking about it now, what would a Chu Liyue know? If he admitted it, wouldn't it be equivalent to saying that something would definitely happen to Shangguan? He waved his sleeves fiercely. The third princess will naturally be safe and sound. Do I need you to say that? Chu Liyue smiled with curved eyes as though she didn't mind Elder Qiushi's bad attitude at all. Lei Laoxi clenched the hammer in his hand tightly and suppressed the emotions in his heart with much difficulty as he turned to look at the colorful barrier. Everyone is really here. If it weren't for the fact that he had to guard this place and boss kept reminding him not to mess around, even if he had to search the entire mystic forest, he would have found Shangguan and the rest and smashed their heads open with a hammer. Chu Liyue glanced at him lightly. Even if she only saw his back view, she could still feel that suppressed anger. It's really tough for him to hold it in. Chu Liyue's lips curled up. If there was a chance, she really wanted to have a good chat with Lei Laosi. Mu Qinghe persuaded in a low voice. Elder Qiushi, since you're here, the third princess should be nearby too. Why don't we use this place as the center and search the surroundings? You might be able to find her. Elder Qiushi's face was filled with worry. That's the only way. Right, what's that? As he spoke, he raised his finger and pointed at the colorful barrier with a bewildered expression. Just now, he only wanted to find Shangguan Wan and didn't pay attention to anything else. Now that he paid a little more attention, he realized that there seemed to be something wrong with this place. The suppression contained in that colorful barrier was incomparably shocking. The most important thing was that it seemed to have attracted Tianlei. Isn't this? This is the 9th grade fiend that we were looking for previously. Mu Qinghe said softly. Although Elder Qiushi had already expected it, he was still shocked when he heard it personally. He couldn't help but take 2 steps forward as he stared intently ahead. This real? He had never seen a legendary fiend before. If this 9th grade fiend could successfully break through, then, Elder Qiushi, aren't you in a hurry to find the third princess? Chu Luiyue asked lazily. Elder Qiushi's expression froze. I think I should wait here to get the blood of the legendary fiend. After all, the third princess is here for this. If I miss it, the third princess will definitely blame me. Zap! A black arrow pierced through the air. It went straight for Elder Qiushi's glabella. At the same time, his furious voice was like a clap of thunder, exploding in their ears. Old thing, you're dreaming. Digression, there's one more update. Around 9 p.m., mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from iYuan. Chapter 703. Elder Qiushi was shocked and immediately blocked it with his hand. Mu Qinghe raised her arm, raised the scabbard, and blocked that black arrow. Ding! A crisp sound of collision was heard. Mu Qinghe's expression changed slightly. The power contained in this arrow was extremely strong, and it directly numbed half of his arm. However, he didn't block that arrow completely and only caused it to deviate slightly from its original direction. Elder Qiushi was furious, but he didn't have time to execute any other moves and could only grab it with his bare hands. He did grab the arrow, but his palms seemed to be on fire. Elder Qiushi's eyelids twitched harshly, and he couldn't wait to let go of his hand immediately. However, how could he do such a thing with so many people watching? Thus, he could only forcefully endure it and silently swallow this pain. However, the power on that arrow was too strong. After it landed in his hand, it actually didn't stop and was still spinning crazily instead. That arrow actually shot out from Elder Qiushi's hand. As the direction was slightly deviated previously, that arrow still flew over his head and brushed past his scalp tightly. Elder Qiushi felt that his scalp was almost lifted. However, what made him suffer the most right now wasn't the pain in his scalp, but his hand stretched out slightly, and he quickly lowered his head to take a look. His palm was already badly mutilated. Elder Qiushi's heart thumped harshly. If that arrow really passed through my glabella, I'm afraid I'll lose my life. After the shock, there was lingering fear. After the lingering fear, there was anger. Elder Qiushi only felt that his heart and lungs were filled with extreme resentment, which almost made him crazy. He raised his head furiously and glared at Lei Laosi. What about me? Lei Laosi raised his hand, and that arrow turned around and flew back into his hand. He took a look and wiped the arrow on his coarse clothes in disdain before putting it back into the quiver. It was as though it was stained with something dirty. I'm not going to tell you that with me, Lei Laosi. Around today, no one can enter this barrier. As Lei Laosi spoke, he glared at Elder Qiushi with a warning gaze. The corners of his eyes were red, and his face was fierce. It was obvious that he was really angry. No one doubted that if anyone dared to step forward, he would immediately pierce through their heart. There was a moment of silence. Even Elder Qiushi, who had suffered a great loss, took a while to react. He opened his mouth, but did not know how to refute. This Lei Laosi's strength is definitely above all of us. Elder Qiushi had a proud personality and liked to compete for everything. However, when his life was in danger, he knew to lower his head and admit defeat. Who asked him to be slightly inferior? Elder Qiushi tried his best to make his expression look natural, but his stiff face still betrayed him, showing his nervousness and fear. "Oh, for you. How could he be so arrogant? Could it be that this 9th rank magical beast is your magical beast?" Lei Laosi looked at him as though he was looking at a dead man. "Looks like you haven't suffered enough just now." As he spoke, he was about to knock another arrow. Elder Qiushi's heart trembled, and he actually took half a step back unconsciously. Chu Luiyue glanced at it, and her lips curled up into a smile. He didn't laugh out loud. However, who couldn't tell the meaning of this mockery? Elder Qiushi instantly felt extremely embarrassed. His old face had been completely lost here. "I'd better go and find the 3rd princess first." Then he hurriedly turned around and left. After walking for a distance, Elder Qiushi's expression still didn't recover. This was the first time he had made a fool of himself. Mu Qinghe looked at Lei Laosi with a deep gaze. Lei Laosi clearly had the intention to kill when he attacked just now. Who exactly is he? Did he attack so viciously because he felt offended or because of other reasons? Boom! Another bolt of heavenly lightning struck. Chu Luiyue turned around and looked intently. This was already the 5th Tianlei. Half of the 9th Tianlei was already gone. The transparent part of the barrier also became wider and wider, almost reaching half of the entire height. However, the strange thing was that no one could see the magical beast's appearance until now. Chu Luiyue looked carefully again, and suddenly, her gaze focused. Hearing her voice, the few of them followed her line of sight. A piece of dried brown tree bark. "That seems to be a tree." Yi Ranran was the first to speak with sharp eyes. Chu Luiyue actually saw it too. At the center of the barrier, there indeed seemed to be a huge and thick Wanyesan. At first, they could only see piled up fallen leaves and extended tree roots, but now, they could see a section of the tree trunk. This tree was taller and more majestic than any tree they had seen before. Chu Luiyue took a closer look and realized that even if 5 people hugged the tree together, they might not be able to do it. However, wasn't there a 9th grade magical beast trying to break through inside the barrier? Why is there a strange tree here? As the light kept flashing above, everyone couldn't see clearly what was inside other than the tree. Fortunately, the colorful light above the barrier continued to converge toward the top. Below, another part of the barrier became transparent. The pressure became stronger and stronger. Obviously, that magical beast had successfully survived the 5th Tianlei. Whoosh! The sound of wings flapping and the sound of the wind suddenly came. A huge shadow was cast on the barrier. Half of the shadow was outlined. Mu Hongyu exclaimed, "That's really a wing. That must be the magical beasts." She couldn't hide her surprise and shouted at Chu Luiyue, "Luyu, what we saw just now is that." Chu Luiyue didn't respond. Mu Hongyu couldn't help but turn to look at her, only to see Chu Luiyue staring at the barrier, her face full of shock. Luyu? What's wrong with you?" Mu Hongyu nudged her arm uneasily and asked softly, "What's wrong?" Chu Luiyue's blood almost froze. She opened her mouth with difficulty. "Did you see the color of that wing?" Mu Hongyu was stunned. "Color? I think it's colorful. What's wrong?" Chu Luiyue's heart skipped a beat. Just now, that half of the wing, she couldn't be more familiar with it. That was the wing of the 9-colored heavenly pheasant. Digression. Tomorrow at 12 o'clock, mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from Love Network. Chapter 704. Chu Luiyue's body stiffened. Only her heart was beating violently, as though it was going to jump out of her mouth. Her mind was blank. Back then, she had been forced into a desperate situation and had resolutely chosen to commit suicide. But before that, she had specially released the 9-colored heavenly pheasant. Generally speaking, when the owner died, the contracted magical beast would definitely die along with it. At that time, Chu Luiyue had forcefully removed the contract between them, hoping that her choice wouldn't affect it. However, the situation was critical. Even Chu Luiwei didn't know what had happened in the end. Previously, she had asked around and the news she got was that the 9-colored heavenly pheasant was dead. Even though Chu Luiwei was extremely sorrowful, she had gradually accepted this matter and buried it deep in her heart. Originally, she thought that this matter would forever pass like this and that no one would remember that there was a 9-colored heavenly pheasant in this world that had accompanied her for many years. But now, that half a wing that suddenly flashed past stunned Chu Luiwei. A preposterous thought appeared in her mind. Probably, the 9-colored heavenly pheasant from back then was actually still alive. Chu Luiwei's eyes didn't blink as she stared at the rainbow-colored barrier in front of her. That's right. This barrier is also rainbow-colored. Upon closer inspection, isn't it exactly the same color as the 9-colored heavenly pheasant? Chu Luiwei's hands clenched tightly in her sleeves. Her heart felt like it was being hung by something. Her chest felt empty, but it also felt like it was being crazily squeezed by something. It was so uncomfortable that she couldn't speak. If the 9th-grade magical beast inside is really... But what if it isn't? Chu Luiwei's knuckles turned white. After the surging anticipation and desire, a trace of fear actually appeared. Although the 9-colored heavenly pheasant was rare, there wasn't only one in this world. Two thoughts were crazily fighting in Chu Luiwei's mind. One was thinking, maybe it is? Maybe I really received pity from the heavens and returned my magical beast to me? The other was thinking, how can there be such a coincidence in this world? If not, then wouldn't I have been happy for nothing? Sometimes, giving people hope and then letting them be disappointed was even harder to accept than not having any hope at all. Chu Luiwei's eyes were dry. Her throat seemed to be blocked by something, and her limbs were cold. She had already lost too much and definitely didn't want to experience such pain again. Mu Hongyu was worried when she saw that Chu Luiwei's expression was off. What's wrong with you? She had never seen Chu Luiwei had such an expression. She seemed to be something. Is she to look to the magical beast inside the barrier too? To see, Chu Luiwei lightly shook her head. Li. How do you to be to Mu Hongyu pressed her lips against each other. Seeing that Chu Luiwei didn't seem to want to say anything and that her attention was still on the fiend that was breaking through, she could only swallow her words. Forget it, I'll ask her what's going on later. Suddenly, Mu Hongyu caught a glimpse of Dumpling, who was squatting on Chu Luiwei's shoulder. Her body seemed to have flashed with a colorful light. It was fleeting. Mu Hongyu blinked and took a closer look. She found that the light had disappeared. Dumpling was still the same Dumpling. Her body was furry and blood-red, and she didn't seem to have changed. Maybe I saw wrongly, Mu Hongyu rubbed her eyes. Staring at the colorful barrier, she felt like she was about to start hallucinating. Dumpling quietly leaned against Chu Luiwei's neck. Chu Luiwei didn't look back, but subconsciously patted her body. If she turned her head to look, she would see that Dumpling's eyes were closed. And between her eyebrows, there was a faint flash of light. But Chu Luiwei didn't see any of this. She only raised her head to take a look. Among the layers of rolling dark clouds, the 6th Tianlei had gathered. Now, she was more anxious than anyone else. She couldn't wait for the remaining Tianlei to fall. As long as the colorful barrier faded and became transparent, she would be able to see the situation inside. Also, she wanted to know if the demonic beast that was breaking through inside was what she guessed. The waiting time seemed to be unbearable. Chu Luiwei counted silently in her heart. Finally, boom, the 6th Tianlei fell with a loud bang. Boom boom boom. The power of each Tianlei was stronger than the previous Tianlei. When the 6th Tianlei fell, it even tore the void apart. Behind it, a straight black spatial crack stretched across the sky. It slashed down from top to bottom. Violent energy shockwaves spread out in all directions, sweeping across everything in its path. All the trees in the vicinity were overturned. Even Lei Laosi, who was guarding at the front, was forced back by 3 steps. He cursed in his heart, and the hammer in his hand fell harshly to the ground. A barrier instantly appeared in front of him. He turned back and shouted at Chu Luiwei and the rest. What are you waiting for? What are you waiting for? Are you looking for death by standing so close? I'm supposed to stay here to guard. Why are they joining in the fun? A formless wave of energy surged forth. It went straight for Chu Luiyue. Chang Wanzhou's expression turned cold, and he immediately went forward. A sparrow blue flame flashed past. Boom! The two forces collided harshly. Mu Hongyu immediately pulled Chu Luiyue's arm and wanted to retreat with her. Luiyue, quickly go. This position is simply too dangerous. However, Chu Luiyue suddenly grabbed her hand and pushed it away slowly and firmly. Retreat first. Mu Hongyu was confused. What does that mean? You're not retreating with us, you're still going to stay here? Chu Luiyue stared at the colorful barrier in front of her without blinking. The surrounding light was so bright that it was almost blinding. However, she could still clearly see that the colorful stream of light in the middle of the barrier was fading away quickly. She could already see the extremely thick branches and leaves of Wan Yeshan. Just a little more, Luiyue. Mu Hongyu urged her again and grabbed her hand again. Yi Ranran also persuaded her. Luiyue, Tianlei will only get stronger behind us. Let's retreat for a while first. No matter what Chu Luiyue wanted to do, she had to protect her own life first, right? Chu Luiyue looked at Chang Wanzhou in front of her and quickly ordered in a low voice. Little Zhou, take the two of them and leave first. Chang Wanzhou turned around. His delicate eyes were full of shock. Seeing Chu Luiyue's determined expression, he pursed his lips and nodded gently. Since it was her order, he naturally had to obey it unconditionally. Chang Wanzhou quickly moved and pulled Mu Hongyu and Yi Ranran back. The two of them were no match for Chang Wanzhou at all. They were taken away just like that. Boom! The seventh Tianlei struck fiercely. Chu Luiyue clenched her fists and took a step forward. Mobile users, please browse for a better reading experience from Love Network. Chapter 705. Lei Laosi heard the commotion and turned around to take a look. When he saw Chu Luiyue advancing instead of retreating, he was instantly angered. Little brat, are you tired of living? Other people wouldn't even be able to escape in time, but she actually went forward. She really doesn't care about her own life. However, Chu Luiyue didn't have any hesitation on her face. That pair of eyes that were as deep and bright as black jade was surging with an extremely firm and cold aura at this moment. Lei Laosi was about to scold her again when he saw her expression and was suddenly stunned. That beautiful face was filled with persistence, and there was even undisguised nobility and disdain between her brows. It was as though she was saying that no one in this world could stop her from doing what she wanted to do. This expression, this attitude, this high and mighty aura that made people submit to her, Lei Laosi had only seen it on one person before. The current Chu Luiyue was like a completely different person from that cunning smile from before. For some reason, Lei Laosi suddenly felt that this face in front of him seemed to have gradually merged with a certain face in his memory. He shook his head harshly. Is he crazy? He actually compared Chu Luiyue to Her Highness? But once this thought appeared, it seemed to have taken root in his heart and couldn't be removed no matter what. Just as he was hesitating, Chu Luiyue took another step forward. She was standing 10 steps away from the barrier just now, but she was even closer now. Lei Laosi wanted to persuade her again, but Chu Luiyue suddenly turned her gaze and glanced at him. That glance was extremely light and faint. Lei Laosi suddenly shuddered as though he was nailed to the ground by something. He swallowed the rest of his sentence back. Seems like, that glance just now really seems like it. So much so that for a moment he almost, is that Chu Luiyue crazy? Is she crazy? Elder Qiushi, who had previously said that he was leaving to look for Shangguan Wan, was still standing not far away. He was glaring at Chu Luiyue with a face full of shock and anger. He pointed a finger at Chu Luiyue and trembled like a sieve. Mu Qinghe frowned. Chu Luiyue was her business. What did it have to do with others? Elder Qiushi was so angry because he was worried that Chu Luiyue would be closer to that demonic beast. He was afraid that the pavilion closest to the water would gain the moonlight first. He took a few steps back and said calmly, Elder Qiushi, if something really happens to her, she can only blame herself for not caring about her own life. Why are you so agitated? Furthermore, didn't you say that you were going to look for the third princess first? Elder Qiushi was at a loss for words. He wanted to find Shangguan, but the ninth-rank magical beast was here. His face flushed red. After a while, he retorted. This old man is worried that Chu Luiyue will ruin things because of his greed. At this moment, Mu Hongyu and the other two had already retreated to the back, and they happened to hear Elder Qiushi's words clearly. Mu Hongyu was already very worried about Chu Luiyue. When she heard this, she was even angrier. I say, is this Elder Qiushi? What right do you have to say that about Luyu? What do you mean by her greed will ruin things? It's a ninth-rank magical beast. What can Luyu do to it? Aren't you thinking too highly of our Luyu? They were now afraid that Luyu would be in danger, but he was still saying such things. Elder Qiushi said angrily, You, who are you? How dare you talk back to me like this? Yi Ranran kindly explained, Elder Qiushi, this is Mu Hongyu. She's also the new disciple of Dragon Teeth Mountain's Mountain Master. Elder Qiushi was instantly speechless. In the entire Xiling, who didn't know that Jian Shai was a protective person? If they really angered him, it would really cause a lot of trouble. Elder Qiushi swallowed his anger and was at a loss. He waved his sleeve and rebuked angrily, No matter who you are, Chu Luiyue is wrong for doing this. If we can't obtain the deity this time. At this point, Elder Qiushi suddenly remembered what happened earlier and immediately felt his palm hurt even more. His lips squirmed twice, and he changed his words. If we can't successfully complete the mission this time, all the blame will be borne by Chu Luiyue alone. He's really twisting words and forcing logic. Mu Hongyu was so angry that she laughed. Yi Ranran's round little face also had a serious expression. Even Chang Wanzhou, who had been looking at Chu Luiyue, turned his head and glanced coldly at Elder Qiushi. Elder Qiushi only felt a chill on his body, and his heart inexplicably turned cold. Yi Ranran said, Elder Qiushi, if you're really so considerate of the third princess, why don't you go over yourself now? This way, you don't have to worry about Luyu doing anything bad and affecting that divine beast. What do you think? Elder Qiushi was choked half to death. He huffed and puffed until smoke came out of his head. Finally, he said, Chu Luiyue alone is already risky enough in the past. How can I go too? The right thing to do is to wait and see. Mu Hongyu sneered. The scene fell into a strange silence. Elder Qiushi also realized that his words were very powerless, and his face turned red and white. Mu Qinghe finally spoke. Elder Qiushi, why don't you go over there first and see how eldest young master is doing? Perhaps, eldest young master has a way to contact the third princess. Elder Qiushi turned around to take a look. Only then did he vaguely see a figure in the distance. That was Jianghu. Why is eldest young master there? He's injured and is recuperating for the time being, Mu Qinghe explained. You can go over and protect eldest young master while you're at it. Elder Qiushi was really speechless. Thinking that it was so embarrassing here, he might as well leave first. Elder Qiushi thought for a moment and put on a worried expression. How can we let eldest young master stay alone in such a situation? I'll go first. With that, he really left. On the one hand, he didn't want to see Mu Hongyu and the others again. On the other hand, Jiang Yuqing's location wasn't very far from here. If something really happened here, he could quickly rush over from there. Of course, the most important thing was that he felt that Chu Luiyue was just courting death if he went over. It was impossible for him to cause any trouble. Then there was nothing to worry about. After he left, the remaining people finally quieted down. However, Chu Luiyue, who was standing in front, was unaware of this. 2/3 of the area of the huge barrier had become transparent. From where Chu Luiyue was, he could already see the branches of the thick tree. It seemed like there was something on this tree. Chu Luiyue couldn't help but take another step forward. The 8th tunlei suddenly fell. Boom! The bright and dazzling light almost lit up the entire world. Chu Luiyue's sight was filled with white light. Suddenly, in the vast expanse of whiteness, a brilliant stream of colorful light quietly arrived. Almost all the colors on the barrier faded away, leaving only the last circle at the top. A magnificent feather floated down to the ground. Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from Love Network. Chapter 706. Chu Liuyue's entire body stiffened. Only her heart was beating furiously, as though it was about to jump out of her mouth. Her mind was completely blank. Back then, she had been forced into a desperate situation and had resolutely chosen to commit suicide. But before that, she had specially released the 9-colored sky pheasant. Generally speaking, when a master died, their contracted magical beasts would definitely die as well. At that time, Chu Luiyue had forcefully rescinded the contract between them, hoping that her choice would not affect it. However, the situation had been dire. Even Chu Luiyue herself did not know what had happened in the end. Previously, she had tried to ask around indirectly, and the news she had received was that the 9-colored sky pheasant was already dead. Even though Chu Luiyue was filled with grief, she had gradually accepted this matter and buried it deep in her heart. Originally, she had thought that this matter would pass by forever and that no one would ever remember that there had been a 9-colored sky pheasant in this world that had accompanied her for many years. But now, that half of a wing that had suddenly swept past had completely dumbfounded Chu Luiyue. An absurd idea popped up in her mind. Perhaps, possibly, probably, the 9-colored sky pheasant from back then was actually still alive? Chu Liuyue's eyes did not blink as she stared at the colorful barrier in front of her. That's right. This barrier was also colorful. Upon closer inspection, wasn't it exactly the same color as the 9-colored sky pheasant's body? Chu Luiyue clenched her fists tightly in her sleeves. Her heart felt like it was being hung by something and her chest was empty. However, it also felt like it was being squeezed by something crazily, making her so uncomfortable that she could not speak. If the 9th-grade magical beast inside was really, but what if it wasn't? Chu Liuyue's knuckles turned white. After the surging anticipation and desire, a trace of fear actually appeared. Although the 9-colored sky pheasant was rare, there was more than one in this world. Two thoughts were frantically fighting in Chu Liuyue's mind. One was thinking, maybe it is? Maybe the heavens really took pity on her and returned her magical beast to her? The other was thinking, how could there be such a coincidence in this world? If it wasn't, then wasn't she rejoicing for nothing? Sometimes, giving people hope and then letting them down was even harder to accept than not having any hope at all. Chu Liuyue's eyes were dry and her throat seemed to be blocked by something. Her limbs were cold. She had already lost too much. She definitely didn't want to experience such pain again. Mu Hongyu saw that there was something wrong with Chu Liuyue's expression and felt worried. Liuyue, what's wrong with you? She had almost never seen Chu Liuyue reveal such an expression. It was as if she was waiting for something, but also as if she was afraid of something. Was she looking at the magical beasts inside the colorful barrier? Didn't she only see half a wing? Chu Liuyue shook her head gently. I'm fine. How did this look like she was fine? Mu Hongyu pursed her lips. Seeing that Chu Liuyue didn't seem to want to say more and her attention was still on the magical beast that was breaking through, she could only swallow her words. Forget it. I'll ask her what's going on later. Suddenly, Mu Hongyu glanced out of the corner of her eye and accidentally saw Tuanzi, who was squatting on Chu Liuyue's shoulder. There seemed to be a flash of colorful light on its body. It was fleeting. Mu Hongyu blinked and took a closer look, only to find that the light had disappeared. Tuanzi was still the original Tuanzi. Its whole body was furry and blood-red. There didn't seem to be any change. Maybe she had seen it wrong. Mu Hongyu rubbed her eyes. She had been staring at the colorful barrier for so long that she felt like she was going to hallucinate. Tuanzi calmly leaned against Chu Liuyue's neck. Chu Liuyue didn't look back, but subconsciously patted its body. If she turned her head at this moment, she would see that Tuanzi's eyes were closed. And between its eyebrows, there was a faint flash of light. But Chu Liuyue didn't see any of these. She just looked up. The 6th bolt of heavenly lightning had already gathered in the layers of dark clouds. Now, she was more anxious than anyone else. She couldn't wait for all the remaining heavenly thunder to fall at once. As long as the light on the colorful barrier faded away and became transparent, she would be able to see what was going on inside. And she wanted to know if the magical beast that was breaking through inside was the same as she had guessed. The waiting time seemed to be particularly hard to bear. Chu Luiyue counted silently in her heart. The sixth heavenly thunder fell with a loud bang. Boom, boom. The power of each heavenly thunder was stronger than the previous one. When the sixth heavenly thunder fell, it even tore through the void. Behind it, a straight black crack in space stretched across the sky. It came down from the top to the bottom. Violent energy ripples spread out in all directions, sweeping across the area. All the trees within the perimeter were overturned. Even Fourth Lei, who was guarding at the front, was forced back 3 steps. He cursed in his heart and smashed the hammer in his hand onto the ground. A barrier instantly appeared in front of him. He turned around and shouted at Chu Luiyue and the others. "What are you waiting for? Hurry up and retreat?" Were they looking for death by standing so close to him? He was going to stay here and be in charge of guarding. What were they doing here? An invisible wave surged over. It went straight for Chu Luiyue. Chang Wanzhou's expression turned slightly cold, and he immediately stepped forward. A sparrow blue flame flashed past. Boom! The 2 waves of energy collided violently. Mu Hongyu immediately grabbed Chu Luiyue's arm and was about to retreat with her. "Luiyue, hurry up and leave." This position was too dangerous. However, Chu Luiyue suddenly grabbed her hand and then slowly and firmly pushed it away. "Both of you retreat first." Mu Hongyu had a blank expression. "What? What did that mean? You're not retreating with us, you're going to stay here?" Chu Luiyue stared at the colorful barrier in front of her. Light shone around them, so bright that one couldn't open their eyes. However, she could still clearly see that the colorful flowing light in the middle of the barrier was fading away quickly. She could already see the thick branches and leaves of the curly fir tree. Just a little bit more, Luiyue." Mu Hongyu urged her again and grabbed her hand again. "Luiyue, the heavenly thunder will only get stronger and stronger. Let's retreat a little first." No matter what Chu Luiyue wanted to do, they had to protect their own lives first, right? Chu Luiyue looked at Chang Wanzhou in front of him and quickly ordered in a low voice. Chu Luiyue looked at Chang Wanzhou, who was in front of him. Chang Wanzhou turned around, his exquisite eyes filled with shock. Seeing Chu Luiyue's determined expression, he pursed his lips and nodded slightly. Since it was her order, he naturally had to obey it unconditionally. Chang Wanzhou moved quickly. He pulled Mu Hongyu and Yi ran and retreated. The 2 of them were no match for Chang Wanzhou. They were taken away just like that. Rumble! The 7th Luiyue struck down ruthlessly. Chu Luiyue clenched her fists tightly and took a step forward. Mobile users, please browse and read. For a better reading experience, please visit the website. Chapter 707. Shangguan Wan hid her aura perfectly, so when she suddenly appeared, no one present actually noticed her existence in advance. So, when her figure entered everyone's sight, it truly shocked everyone. She was stained with a bit of dirt, but it wasn't much. Compared to Jiang Yuqing and Elder Qiushi, it was almost negligible. At first glance, her hair was just a little messy and 2 drops of blood splattered on her face. Right now, she was charging towards the barrier at full speed. She obviously wanted to attack the 9-colored heavenly pheasant that was breaking through. The aura surging around her actually reached a shocking peak 7th grade. Chu Luiyue squinted her eyes, and a trace of coldness flashed past the corner of her eyes. Peak 7th grade, Shangguan Wan's Yuan Meridian is crippled now, but she can actually still pretend to have such abilities. It can be seen that she spent a lot of effort. Seeing that she was getting closer and closer to the barrier, Chu Luiyue's heart suddenly surged with disgust. Even if this 9-colored heavenly pheasant had nothing to do with her, she wasn't willing to see Shangguan Wan succeed. Shangguan Wan didn't have the right to snatch it from the same clan of fiends that she once contracted with. Other people only thought that Shangguan came for the so-called mythical beast's blood, but Chu Luiwei was very clear that her motive for coming here was definitely not just this. Wanting to contract with a mythical beast? Why don't you see if you have the ability and luck to do so? Chu Luiwei paused in her footsteps, and a thought flashed across her mind. Lei Laosi, who was standing closest to the barrier, heard the commotion and immediately turned around to take a look. The next moment, he saw Shangguan, who was rushing over aggressively. Lei Laosi was instantly enraged. Great. I haven't gone to look for them yet, but they all came to me one by one. Lei Laosi stomped his right foot harshly on the ground. The tall and sturdy figure immediately flew into the air. His speed was extremely fast. Only an afterimage was left on the spot, but he had already charged in front of Shangguan. At the same time, he drew his bow and shot an arrow. The series of actions was done smoothly. So, the black arrow instantly flew out. He tore through the air and left. Shangguan had actually been waiting in the nearby woods for quite some time. After she was separated from Elder Qiushi and the rest, she was trapped in the same place with more than 10 black cavalry soldiers and 5 to 6 sect disciples. It was also thanks to them that she was able to escape from that damned place. Of course, after she came out, those people would stay in the dirty and rotten swamp forever. After that, she searched aimlessly in the forest, hoping to find someone who was alone. However, it didn't take long for them to hear the commotion. Looking at the Tianlei falling one after another, what else was there to not understand? She couldn't care less about looking for him and rushed over without stopping. After arriving here, she didn't advance rashly. Instead, she waited in the distance for an opportunity to arrive. From her position, she could see Lei Laosi and the group. She even saw Elder Qiushi and Jianghu who came later. However, out of caution, she did not come out and only waited patiently. At times like this, her mind was usually very sharp. Finally, she arrived at the 9th Tianlei. This was the best opportunity and the only opportunity, because at this time, a 9th grade fiend's defense was the weakest. Hence, she rushed out without hesitation. However, she didn't expect Lei Laosi to be even faster. He actually blocked in front of her. Facing the black arrow that shot towards her glabella, Shangguan's eyes darkened, and she flicked her wrist lightly. A black shield immediately appeared in front of her. Ding! The black arrow hit the black shield harshly and made a crisp sound. The arrowhead actually bent directly. On the other hand, that black shield didn't even have a scratch on it. Seeing the black shield that Shangguan suddenly took out, Chu Luiwei furrowed his brows slightly. On the other side, Mu Qinghe's expression was slightly cold, and a trace of complicated emotions flashed past the corner of his eyes. He didn't expect Shangguan to actually take this for herself. Shangguan scoffed. It's just a small trick. No matter who you are, get out of the way quickly. If you delay my matters, I won't let you off easily. De Huang Swamp was also part of the Tianling dynasty's territory, so her identity was still the most honorable here. Normally, those who were tactful would turn pale with fright and move aside humbly. Shangguan looked arrogant as she looked at Lei Laosi high up in the air, as though she was looking at an ant. However, the scene in her imagination didn't happen. Not only did Lei Laosi's face not reveal any shock or fear, but he became even more ferocious instead. His gaze swept past the black shield in front of Shangguan, and the fury in his heart almost burst through the sky. There's actually such a shameless person in this world. Was this black shield something that she was worthy of? What is this? How dare you behave atrociously here? He put away the bow and arrows in his hands and replaced them with a hammer. Without another word, he raised it high up. The surrounding heaven and earth force rapidly gathered. His knotted muscles tightened, and a vast aura surged around him. It rose crazily. In the end, it stopped at beginner stage 8. Shangguan's heart skipped a beat. This Lei Laosi actually concealed his abilities previously. Beginner stage 8? How can I possibly be his opponent? The two of them were in a stalemate for a moment. At this moment, Chu Luiwei was thinking about how to stop Shangguan. Suddenly, a cool breeze brushed past her ears. She was shocked as she saw a red shadow scurrying out directly. It also went straight for that barrier. Dumpling! Chu Luiyue shouted, but she couldn't stop Dumpling. She turned around and followed her without thinking. The aftermath of the 9-colored heavenly pheasant breaking through to become a legendary beast was extremely terrifying. Judging from this smell, this 9-colored heavenly pheasant's bloodline power was extremely rich, and it was basically about to break through successfully. With such a horrible bloodline pressure, Tuanzi would be crushed if she went there. Just as Chu Luiyue followed her worriedly, Lei Laosi also noticed the situation here. Damn it! Both of them are so restless. If Shangguan Wan wanted to barge into this place, he definitely had to stop her, but what was going on with Chu Luiyue? Didn't she want to leave just now? Did she think that she could barge into this barrier safely with her mediocre abilities? Damn girl! Go back. Lei Laosi couldn't hold it in and directly cursed. Seeing that Chu Luiyue didn't listen to a single word and rushed over here without stopping, Lei Laosi became even more anxious. Damn it. That Chu Luiyue is courting death herself. Why am I so anxious? Lei Laosi despised himself in his heart as he shouted in the other direction, "You're too arrogant. Big brother, do something." Shangguan Wan saw Chu Luiyue rushing over here, and her lungs were about to explode from anger. How dare a lowly person dream of becoming a legendary beast? Dream on. She grabbed this gap, turned her feet slightly, and rushed over from another direction. Chu Luiyue could clearly hear the commotion around her. However, she only wanted to bring Dumpling back. A terrifying shockwave carrying a gorgeous radiance suddenly spread out from the barrier. Chu Luiyue's heart tightened. Dumpling! Poof! Dumpling's body flashed, and she actually went into that colorful energy wave. Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from Love Network. Chapter 708. Tuanzi's figure disappeared in an instant. That energy that was about to reach Chu Luiyue seemed to have been stopped by an invisible hand, and then it quickly retreated. Chu Luiyue looked at the empty space in front of her, as well as the barrier with a few faint ripples, and was dazed. What's going on? Not only did Dumpling disappear, but the energy that was halfway dispersed could actually be retracted? Chu Luiyue closed her eyes and took a closer look to confirm that she didn't see wrongly. Everything that happened just now was real. Dumpling actually barged in unscathed? She saw clearly that when Dumpling went in, she indeed didn't suffer any threat or harm. It seemed like she went in naturally, as though she entered a place where there was no one. But standing here, Chu Luiyue could still clearly feel the valiant suppression from the boundary. Why did it have to be Dumpling? Right at this moment, Chu Luiyue suddenly felt a force surrounding her. She furrowed her brows and wanted to counterattack immediately. But the moment she was about to make a move, she suddenly realized something and turned her head to look. A man stood in the forest over there. That man was tall, and his shoulders were straight. Like Lei Laosi, he was wearing a coarse hemp garment. He looked to be around 30 years old and had an ordinary appearance. He was the kind that absolutely couldn't be recognized in a crowd. At this moment, he was looking at Chu Luiyue. To be precise, he was looking at the spot in front of Chu Luiyue where Dumpling disappeared. His long and narrow eyes were slightly deep, like a deep and quiet well that didn't have any ripples. Chu Luiyue's heart suddenly skipped a beat. This man's gaze seems a little familiar. This should be the big brother that Lei Laosi mentioned. That man waved his sleeves, and Chu Luiyue's body moved uncontrollably. In the blink of an eye, she was a few steps away from that man. Then that force disappeared quietly. The two of them faced each other. Chu Luiyue's heart trembled. This man's ability was definitely not weaker than Lei Laosi and might even be above him. Who exactly were these two people? Why were they guarding a 9-colored heavenly pheasant in this desolate and dangerous mystic forest Linjihong? From the color of the 9-colored heavenly pheasant's wings, she could tell that it was extremely powerful. There was no need for these two people to stand guard here. Even if it was to ensure sufficient safety when it broke through to become a divine beast, as long as the 9-colored heavenly pheasant gave the order, countless magical beasts would swarm over. Why did they have to pick two humans? Although these two people were indeed very strong, judging from the current situation, these two men were not the master of the nine-colored heavenly pheasant. Whether it was from the perspective of the nine-colored heavenly pheasant or the two of them, this matter was very strange. While Chu Liwei was thinking about these things in her heart, the man opposite her was also quietly sizing her up. "That blood ferret is your contracted magical beast?" he asked in a calm and slightly hoarse voice. Chu Liwei nodded. Who wouldn't be able to tell? Was there a need to ask? When that man heard that, his long and narrow eyes squinted, and dark waves surged in the bottom of his eyes. Chu Liwei felt that something was amiss. This man seems to be looking at my face? What's so good about my face? Chu Liwei wouldn't think that a person who could reach such a level of ability was swayed by her appearance. He seemed to be looking at another person through her. "That magical beast of yours is a little interesting." He suddenly laughed and said. Chu Liwei couldn't figure out what he meant at that moment. In the end, she simply looked up and met his eyes. "What exactly do you want to ask? Feel free to speak your mind." That man raised his brows slightly as if he didn't expect Chu Liwei to be so direct. He suddenly raised his hand. Chu Liwei's expression changed slightly. For some reason, although she knew that this man was very strong to the point that he could kill her with one hand, she didn't feel threatened or uneasy at all. It was as if she was inexplicably certain that he wouldn't hurt her. She had always been a cautious person, and under normal circumstances, she definitely wouldn't have such feelings towards a stranger who suddenly appeared. Chu Liwei looked into his eyes, and a white light flashed across her mind. Wait, could this man be? Even the two of us can't enter this spirit formation. The man in front of her suddenly spoke as his hand brushed past Chu Liwei's ear and pointed behind her. Boom! The sound of a violent collision was suddenly heard. Chu Liwei suppressed the thoughts in her mind and turned around to look. Lei Laosi had blocked Shangguan again. The two of them fought hand to hand. They fought head-on. Shangguan was in front, but Lei Laosi was stronger, so the two of them ended up in a draw. Of course, Shangguan wasn't as strong as him, so she quickly fell into a disadvantage and was defeated by Lei Laosi. If it weren't for her black shield, she wouldn't have been able to take it anymore. Seeing that she couldn't take it anymore, Shangguan hurriedly turned around and asked Mu Qinghe and Elder Qiushi for help. "Vice Admiral Mu. Elder Qiushi. What are you waiting for? Quickly come and help me." Elder Qiushi only hesitated for a moment and immediately planned to go forward. But just as he took a step forward, a bright light suddenly flashed in front of him. Something brushed past the tip of his nose and fell. A fiery pain came, and Elder Qiushi instinctively took a step back. He looked down and saw a palm-sized metal piece piercing into the ground in front of his feet. If it was slightly wrong, his feet would be in trouble. Elder Qiushi was drenched in cold sweat. "It's just an abandoned metal piece, and it has such power. This man's ability is terrifying." Behind Elder Qiushi, Jianghu was sitting cross-legged. He was regulating his breathing and waited for the excruciating pain in his abdomen to dissipate before he simply dealt with the injuries on his body. The force in his body was also smoothed out smoothly, and he recovered a portion of his ability. Seeing Shangguan coming over, he was a little unhappy, but he didn't show it. He was planning to go forward with Elder Qiushi when he encountered this attack head-on. Jianghu stood up and looked at the man who suddenly appeared, and his brows gradually furrowed. There are only a handful of people with such abilities in the Tianling dynasty. Who exactly is this person? Boom, boom, boom. An earth-shattering sound came from within the barrier. The last circle of colorful light at the top was rapidly fading away. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, the huge barrier finally became completely transparent. The huge and sturdy Wan Yeshan was as tall as a canopy. A beautiful and incomparably noble nine-colored heavenly pheasant was standing on top of it. It was like a dazzling ray of light in the sky. It was very luxurious, and its aura was astonishing. There were some charred wounds on its body that were rapidly recovering. Its aura was also rapidly rising. It was about to break through to become a divine beast. Suddenly, the nine-colored heavenly pheasant slowly lowered its head and looked at Chu Liwei. Chu Luiyue seemed to have sensed something and looked up. Their eyes met. Chu Luiyue's heart skipped a beat. A shout almost jumped out from his throat. Little Gio. Digression, my eyes are so dry. But I'm not going to update today. I'll update at 12 tomorrow. I'll update depending on the situation. Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from Love Network. Chapter 709. Even though time and space had changed, Chu Luiyue could still recognize the 9-colored heavenly pheasant when she saw it. It was Little Nine who had accompanied her for countless days and nights. This was an absolute tacit understanding. It was an intuition that could only be formed after experiencing countless life and death situations together. Chu Luiyue clenched her fists tightly and her knuckles turned white. Her heart paused for a short while before it started to beat violently. The blood in her body also started to boil. She didn't know how much effort she had spent to restrain her impulse to go forward. However, her eyes were already sour as if something had suddenly surged up and surrounded her. Little Nine. That's my Little Nine. She thought they were separated by life and death. She didn't expect to meet it again in this place. The disappointment and regret from before had all disappeared. What was left was endless surprise and joy. It was as if a flower had suddenly bloomed under the dust and was swaying with the wind. With just a slight movement, all the pain and hardships instantly became insignificant. Chu Luiyue didn't even blink as she was afraid that everything in front of her was just an illusion. Suddenly, her gaze stopped and she saw that Little Nine's eyes were actually gray. Chu Luiyue was stunned on the spot. That's not right, Little Nine's eyes were usually black. When it used its power, it would change into a gorgeous color. It was never gray. Most importantly, there were no pupils in this pair of gray eyes. At first glance, they looked like two pieces of gray stone, without any spirituality. Although it was also looking at Chu Luiyue, only Chu Luiyue, who was looking at it, could see that the pair of eyes was actually like a dry well. It was lonely and empty without any emotions. After a moment, it calmly retracted its gaze. Chu Luiyue's lips moved slightly and she almost couldn't control herself as she took a step forward. Whoosh! The 9-colored heavenly pheasant suddenly flapped its wings. The wind shook. The leaves rustled. A violent gale spread out in all directions. The people standing nearby were all affected by the shockwave and were forced to retreat. Chu Luiyue wanted to go forward but was pulled back by the man behind her. On the other side, Lei Laosi and Shengguan Wan, who were fighting, also separated. Lei Laosi wasn't paying attention and fell to the ground from the impact. He couldn't help but curse. F***CK. You're heartless. I've worked so hard to protect you. Why don't you go easy on me? But that 9-colored heavenly pheasant turned a deaf ear as if it didn't hear him. It seemed to be angry because the people around it disturbed its breakthrough. Lei Laosi instantly felt a headache. I must be crazy to tell it this. If it listened to his advice, why would he and Big Brother need to watch over it? Previously, it had spent most of its time sleeping. It didn't cause any trouble, and it was fine as long as it was quiet. Now, it was about to break through, and its abilities increased, its strength was changed. Not to mention Lei Laosi, even he was, too. But it was because it was broken, it was because it did it. She used that black shield to block in front of her in a moment of desperation, and it almost blocked most of the power. So, she didn't fall to the ground pathetically like Lei Laosi. She staggered a few steps and barely managed to stand up. She let out a sigh of relief, thinking that the black shield was much more useful than she had imagined. If it wasn't for this thing, she would have died a long time ago. Shengguan Wan looked up at the 9-colored heavenly pheasant again and furrowed her brows. Why did it have to be the 9-colored heavenly pheasant? Previously, she was filled with all sorts of fantasies about this 9th-grade fiend, but she didn't expect it to be the 9-colored heavenly pheasant. If it were any other 9th-grade fiend, she wouldn't have any problems. Except for this 9-colored heavenly pheasant. This was Shengguan Yu's fiend when she was alive. This made Shengguan Wan feel a little uncomfortable. But she couldn't care so much now. Taking advantage of the fact that this thing hadn't completely broken through to become a legendary fiend was the best way to do it. Shangguan burned the force in her body crazily, tapped her toes, and flew up again. She went straight for the 9-colored heavenly pheasant. As long as she plucked out the red feathers on its head, she could subdue it and become its master. The 9-colored heavenly pheasant tilted its head and glanced at Shangguan. Just as it was about to attack again, its vision suddenly landed on the black shield in front of Shangguan. There was a moment of hesitation in its actions. Shangguan was elated. This 9-colored heavenly pheasant doesn't seem to be so hostile towards me. Or perhaps, its brain hasn't turned around yet, and it actually allowed me to get close to it. Perhaps the heavens are destined to let me obtain a legendary fiend. Shangguan was agitated, and because of her excitement, the corners of her eyes were red. In the blink of an eye, she was already in front of that barrier. Ripples suddenly appeared on the transparent barrier. A terrifying aura gradually gathered and condensed into a wave that spread towards Shangguan. Shangguan had witnessed how powerful this barrier was, so she raised the black shield with lingering fear and completely hid her body behind it. Buzz! The shockwave slammed heavily into the black shield. It let out a distant and heavy sound that spread far and wide. The 9-colored heavenly pheasant looked over here and still stared at the black shield closely. It tilted its head slightly and seemed to be thinking about something. That terrifying power shook Shangguan's arms that were holding onto the black shield until they were completely numb. Just as she was worried about what she should do next, she suddenly felt that heavy pressure disappear. She looked up and saw that the ripple was flowing along the black shield to both sides. An entrance suddenly appeared on the barrier. My chance is here. Shangguan was elated and immediately rushed into that entrance without thinking. Lei Laosi was so angry that his liver hurt when he saw this scene. Does this dumb thing know who that is? Why did it become so dumb after waking up from its sleep? Is it blind? Chu Liyue's heart seemed to be stirred by something. Shangguan clearly relied on that black shield to be able to go over. Little Nine didn't seem to remember her anymore, but it still had an inexplicable longing for her things. Chu Liyue clenched her teeth and also rushed over. This time, the man beside her didn't stop her and just stood with his hands behind his back as he watched Chu Liyue rush over. His long and narrow eyes squinted slightly as if he was in deep thought. Chu Liyue was too fast and actually followed Shangguan into that entrance. Lei Laosi exclaimed, "Stupid girl, you're crazy. Come out quickly. That isn't a place that she can enter." Chu Liyue didn't turn back. She looked up at the 9-colored heavenly pheasant. The 9-colored heavenly pheasant also noticed her arrival. It flapped its wings, and a rainbow-colored stream of light wrapped around Chu Liyue tightly like a rope. Shangguan turned back and scoffed. "You're overestimating yourself." Chu Liyue felt as if her organs were being squeezed together harshly. She couldn't breathe, and her face rapidly flushed red. Her vision also turned black. However, she only looked at the 9-colored heavenly pheasant stubbornly. The 9-colored heavenly pheasant seemed to sense something and finally looked over again. Chu Liyue's nose felt sour, but there was a smile at the corner of her lips. She opened her mouth and said silently, "Little Nine, it's me. Little Nine, it's me." Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from Love Network. Chapter 710. Xiaojiu, it's me. There wasn't any sound. Just this silent sentence was enough to shake the heavens and earth. The 9-colored heavenly pheasant's gray eyes seemed to crack instantly. A trace of shock surged out from its eyes. The colorful flowing light that was tightening around Chu Liyue suddenly stopped. She looked up at it. That pair of eyes that were as calm as an ancient well finally had some ripples. Confusion, astonishment, shock, disbelief, many complicated emotions surged up one after another. They intertwined together. Right at this moment, a red furry figure quietly scuttled up the tree trunk and arrived beside the 9-colored heavenly pheasant's red claws. It turned around and saw that Chu Liyue was still trapped in that colorful flowing light. Dumpling gritted her teeth angrily and bit the red claws next to her. The 9-colored heavenly pheasant was in pain. It lowered its head and looked at Dumpling innocently. Dumpling bared her teeth fiercely. The 9-colored heavenly pheasant lowered its head, feeling wronged. Shangguan Wan originally wanted to watch a good show, but she realized that the 9-colored heavenly pheasant suddenly stopped. She turned around and followed its line of sight. Then she saw the blood ferret beside the 9-colored heavenly pheasant's feet. Shangguan Wan frowned. Isn't that Chu Liuyue's fiend? How did it barge in and get so close to the 9-colored heavenly pheasant? Isn't it afraid of the bloodline suppression? And it actually dared to bite the 9-colored heavenly pheasant. Trying to break a rock with an egg. You're courting death. Shangguan Wan sneered. Sure enough, like master, like magical beast. Chu Liyue was someone who didn't care about her life, and her fiend was even more so. Just like that, the 9-colored heavenly pheasant could easily crush it to death. Sensing Shangguan Wan's gaze as if she was looking at a joke, Dumpling immediately glared back fiercely. What are you looking at? I'll even bite myself when I'm crazy. Chu Liyue also saw Dumpling. When did it run over there? She was planning to call Dumpling back, but she saw that the 9-colored heavenly pheasant had already flapped its wings and used a colorful ball to surround Dumpling. Dumpling floated up gently. In the end, it actually reached the top of the 9-colored heavenly pheasant's head. Chu Liyue frowned and shook her head at the 9-colored heavenly pheasant. Can't do that. Dumpling is also her fiend. The 9-colored heavenly pheasant glanced at Chu Liyue before it directly opened its beak and swallowed the colorful ball. Then, it slowly closed its eyes. Dumpling. Chu Liyue exclaimed to Dumpling. Xiaoju really ate Tuanzi? Shangguan Wan watched from the side, feeling happy. Sheet to chew of it to choose it heavenly heavens to be two of her to be to her twos to be to the bee. Young Mistress Chu, the inside of this barrier is the 9-colored heavenly pheasant's territory. Ordinary people can't enter. Your fiend is just a 3rd-grade blood ferret. How can it withstand the 9-colored heavenly pheasant suppression? As I see it, you should quickly leave as well. Otherwise, even I might not be able to protect you. Chu Liyue glanced at her coldly. Shangguan Wan was indeed Shangguan Wan. She could still show such fake concern at such a time. Didn't she find it disgusting? Chu Liyue took a deep breath and realized that the connection between her and Dumpling hadn't been cut off, which meant that it was still alive. She felt more at ease. Dumpling wasn't an ordinary blood ferret. Since it dared to come here, it definitely had the ability to protect itself. Why don't I call Little Nine back and ask it to spit out Dumpling? Chu Liyue asked plainly. It seems like Third Princess is confident in subduing this 9-colored heavenly pheasant? Shangguan Wan's eyes were filled with unconcealable delight. That 9-colored heavenly pheasant obviously treated her differently. It might have already chosen her as its master. It was naturally different from others. Contracting a fiend, especially a high-grade fiend or even a divine beast, depends on fate. Since this 9-colored heavenly pheasant has chosen me, then, boom. A shocking aura suddenly exploded from the 9-colored heavenly pheasant's body. Gorgeous red flowing light spread out from its feathers and quickly healed the scars caused by Tianlei. At the same time, the 9-colored heavenly pheasant suddenly flapped its wings and flew up. It spread its wings and its body was so huge that it almost covered the sky. In the next moment, it changed its direction and flew towards Shangguan Wan. Shangguan Wan was nervous and happy. Is it going to recognize me as its master? Her heart thumped and the blood in her body flowed rapidly as though it was about to boil. The 9-colored heavenly pheasant. Once it breaks through, it will become a divine beast. By then, everyone in the Tianling dynasty will know that she, Shangguan Wan, has contracted a divine beast. Shangguan Yu is so powerful, but didn't she only contract a 9th-grade fiend? As long as today's matter is successful, everyone will know that I, Shangguan Wan, am 100 times stronger than Shangguan Yu. Countless scenes appeared in Shangguan Wan's mind, causing her to tremble in excitement. She took a step forward. As long as I can contract, swoosh. The 9-colored heavenly pheasant swooped down, stuck close to Shangguan, and flew over her head. At the same time, its sharp claws scratched Shangguan's arm. Blood flowed from the wound, and it was so deep that her bones could be seen. Shangguan was caught off guard. She exclaimed and uncontrollably took a few steps back. She looked at her arm in a panic, but she didn't have time to check her injury. That was because the black shield had been snatched away. Shangguan hurriedly looked up and saw that the black shield was being held tightly by the 9-colored heavenly pheasant. She was about to chase after it when she suddenly felt a sharp pain on her arm. She lowered her head, and her eyes immediately widened in horror. She saw a few streaks of colorful flowing light at the edge of the scratches. The colorful flowing light looked gorgeous and magnificent, but in fact, it was wrapped in a terrifyingly high temperature. When it swam back and forth, it was as though it was being roasted by flames. What was even more terrifying was that Shangguan realized that her wound was expanding at a speed visible to the naked eye. The wound that was already deep enough to see the bone was continuously torn apart by the 9-colored heavenly pheasant's power. Intense pain came, and Shangguan's mind went blank from the pain, and she almost fainted. Ah! She screamed hysterically and fell to the ground, curling up into a ball in extreme pain. No, no! A muffled moan came out of her mouth, and it was filled with deep fear. No one knew that the force in Shangguan's body was being devoured crazily, and that colorful flowing light had already spread to her shoulders. Looking from afar, both of her arms were already festering, and it was very terrifying. Chu Luiyue looked at her and narrowed her eyes. The 9-colored heavenly pheasant's attack just now was a mixture of its and Tianlei's power. Shangguan naturally couldn't withstand it. She looked up at the 9-colored heavenly pheasant that was flying in circles in the sky. Little 9 was targeting Shangguan like this. Could it be that it thought of something? Right at this moment, the 9-colored heavenly pheasant suddenly let out a clear cry. Screech! The clear and melodious cry resounded throughout heaven and earth. One of the colorful feathers on its wings suddenly transformed into a scarlet-red color. Chu Luiyue suddenly felt as though something in her body had been stirred up. A moment later, a tinge of shock flashed across her eyes. That was Dumpling's aura. Digression: the rest of the third night watch will be updated at 6:00 p.m. Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from Love Network. Chapter 7:11. Chu Luiyue almost couldn't believe it. She checked again carefully and realized that Dumpling's aura was indeed changing along with the changes on the 9-colored heavenly pheasant's body. This a bold and absurd thought suddenly appeared in Chu Luiyue's mind. Could it be that Dumpling and Little 9? Gradually, the colorful feathers turned crimson red. It was like a burning flame that swept across. Chu Luiyue couldn't be more familiar with such a red color, because it was exactly the same color as Dumpling's body. Recalling the scene where Dumpling was wrapped in a ball and swallowed by the 9-colored heavenly pheasant, Chu Luiyue's eyes flickered and her emotions fluctuated. As the crimson colors appeared, the 9-colored heavenly pheasant's aura also rose crazily. Under the dark sky, it was the most dazzling existence. Chu Luiyue looked up and countless scenes flashed across her mind. The first time she saw Dumpling was in the forest outside the imperial city. It came out from a pile of fallen leaves and seemed to have slept for a long time. It followed her while swaying. She didn't plan to bring a blood ferret with her at first. However, it was very persistent and stuck to her like a little tail. Then she met the black flying python. Dumpling blocked in front of her without hesitation. Even though its small body was not even as big as one of the black flying python's eyes, it still rushed forward. It didn't care about anything else and charged forward. It was covered in wounds, but it never regretted it. After that, they accompanied each other day and night, and they followed each other through life and death. Speaking of which, it could be summarized in 2 or 3 sentences. However, only she knew how much was involved and what kind of meaning it had. She didn't feel it back then, but now that she thought about it, there were traces everywhere. In this world, how could there be a magical beast that would willingly give up its life for a complete stranger without any scruples? It often slacked off and acted coquettishly. It liked to fight with the red demon. It trusted and relied on her completely. Chu Luiyue couldn't help but laugh, but the corners of her eyes were wet. A teardrop silently slid down her cheek and disappeared into her hair. The aura that kept increasing in her body was unfamiliar yet familiar. It was Dumpling. It was also Little Nine. After going around in circles, it had always been by her side. Shang Guanwan tossed and turned in pain and kept moaning in pain. Third princess. Everyone outside the barrier also saw the situation here. They all fell into a great shock and were silent for a long time. Shang Guanwan's cry of pain finally made them come back to their senses. Elder Qiushi hurriedly rushed over. If he really couldn't explain himself. However, as soon as he reached the barrier, he ran into a dilemma. How was he going to get in there? Shang Guanwan and Chu Luiyue could only enter because an entrance appeared on the barrier. But now, the entrance was sealed. The huge transparent barrier glowed faintly and had an extremely strong aura. With his current strength, it was impossible for him to force his way in. He looked at Mu Qinghe, who was standing at the side and didn't say much. Vice Admiral Mu, do you have a way to enter this barrier? The third princess is in a bad situation. If we don't save her as soon as possible, I'm afraid. Mu Qinghe was looking at the 9-colored heavenly pheasant in the barrier and frowned. This 9-colored heavenly pheasant. It didn't look like that one, but why did he feel an inexplicable sense of familiarity? Hearing Elder Qiushi's words, he turned his gaze and thought for a moment. He said in a deep voice, even if we work together, it should be very difficult to open this barrier. Unless that 9-colored heavenly pheasant is willing to let us in. He was close and saw clearly just now that Shang Guanwan could go in because the barrier was opened by herself. Elder Qiushi was very anxious. Then what should we do? Could it be that we are just going to watch and do nothing? Jiang Yuqing pursed his lips. Suddenly, Jiang Yuqing's voice came from behind. Ask Chu Luiyue. Elder Qiushi and Mu Qinghe turned around at the same time. Eldest young master, you mean? Elder Qiushi was confused. After this period of rest, Jiang Yuqing had more or less recuperated his body. He lifted his chin. Didn't Chu Luiyue go in too? But eldest young master, she just took advantage of the situation and followed the third princess in. Why, that 9-colored heavenly pheasant hasn't launched a fatal attack on her until now. Isn't that enough to explain the problem? Jiang Yuqing glanced at Elder Qiushi coldly. Elder Qiushi was stunned and immediately understood. That's right. Although Chu Luiyue's fiend was eaten by that 9-colored heavenly pheasant, she was still standing there perfectly fine. Other than the time when the 9-colored heavenly pheasant attacked her at the very beginning, it seemed to have treated her as if she was invisible. And the only time it attacked her, it didn't cause any substantial damage to Chu Luiyue. Instead, it was Shang Guanwan. He thought that she could form a contract, but he didn't expect her to lose half of her life in the blink of an eye. After understanding this, Elder Qiushi finally understood Jiang Yuqing's intention. However, he was still in a difficult position. Eldest young master, you might not know this, but that Chu Luiyue is stubborn and has some opinions about me. He definitely wouldn't get any results if he went to ask. The last general can just go. Mu Qinghe suddenly spoke. Jiang Yuqing nodded. Elder Qiushi secretly heaved a sigh of relief. Mu Qinghe turned around and walked toward Chu Luiyue. Actually, other than that barrier, the distance between the two of them wasn't considered far. However, to Mu Qinghe, her legs seemed to be filled with lead, and each step was heavier than the previous one. There seemed to be a huge rock pressing down on his heart, making him unable to breathe. His mind was in a mess. 9-colored heavenly pheasant? Is that 9-colored heavenly pheasant? Lei Laosi didn't feel good after seeing Chu Luiyue enter with Shang Guanwan. He and Big Brother had guarded this place for so many days and nights, but they couldn't enter this barrier. Yet, those two entered so easily. How can this be? However, when he had nowhere to vent his anger and even started to consider quitting, he saw that 9-colored heavenly pheasant attacking Shangguan. Seeing Shangguan lying on the ground with her arms festering in pain, Lei Laosi finally vented his anger. Great. Right now, big brother, and I still can't do anything to Shangguan and the rest openly, but who can object to this 9-colored heavenly pheasant attacking? I didn't watch over you for nothing. Lei Laosi felt good as his gaze landed on Chu Luiwei again. That's strange. Why is this girl completely fine? He looked at his big brother and was about to ask for his opinion when he saw him staring at Chu Luiwei with an obscure gaze. Lei Laosi's heart skipped a beat, and he limped over. Big brother, what are you thinking about? That man's lips slowly curled up. I'm thinking that we shouldn't continue to wait. Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from Love Network. Chapter 712. Lei Laosi was stunned as he looked at him in disbelief. What? Big brother, you mean? Immediately after, Lei Laosi suddenly thought of something and quickly looked up. Right? The 9-colored heavenly pheasant only started to transform into a legendary beast after swallowing that blood ferret. Could it be Chu Luiwei? Lei Laosi turned his gaze and looked at the young lady in red standing inside the barrier. She was slender, and her shoulders were thin, but her back was very straight. The wind and clouds moved around her, but she stood proudly as though nothing in this world could make her bend her back. He suddenly recalled Chu Luiwei's gaze when she said that she wanted to enter the barrier. So determined. So persistent. So unparalleled. That blood ferret was her contracted fiend, and from what she said, it was indeed that blood ferret that brought them here. The most important thing was that the 9-colored heavenly pheasant had already tried to kill Shangguan, but it didn't hurt Chu Luiwei at all. With so many clues added together, it was enough to prove one thing. Chu Luiwei. Lei Laosi was agitated, and his hand that was holding the hammer trembled slightly. As he stared at Chu Luiwei's figure, he tried his best to control his emotions and lowered his voice. Big brother, are you sure? This is a serious matter, so I have to be very careful. That man's smile deepened slightly. Just watch. Lei Laosi's heart was scratching. But what do you mean by, just watch? Is it true or not? Give me a definite answer. But that man wasn't willing to say anything else. Lei Laosi could only restrain himself. No matter what the result was, he just had to wait for the 9-colored heavenly pheasant to complete its breakthrough. Mu Qinghe walked to the front of the barrier. The turbulent and powerful suppression was like a small mountain pressing down on his body, making it difficult for him to take every step forward. Even the force circulation in his body slowed down. But he still got close to where Chu Luiwei was. Before he could speak, Chu Luiwei turned around as though she sensed something. Her eyes were bright, clean, and deep like black jade. Mu Qinghe choked on his words. How did you go in? Chu Luiwei raised her brows slightly. Didn't Vice Admiral Mu see everything that happened just now? I followed the third princess in. Mu Qinghe paused for a moment and said straightforwardly, do you have a way to help us go in? Or, you can send the third princess out. Anyone could tell that it was impossible for Shangguan to subdue this 9-colored heavenly pheasant. Moreover, it was about to break through to become a divine beast. By then, it's Qinghe. She's Qinghe. Chu Luiwei glanced at Shangguan, knitted her brows, and hesitated. Lieutenant Mu, do you think that I have such an ability? You probably forgot that my fiend was also swallowed by the 9-colored heavenly pheasant. I can't even go out now, so I naturally don't know how to send the third princess out. Why should I send her out? Isn't it good for her to stay here? Shangguan is greedy. She wants to occupy the 9-colored heavenly pheasant, but she didn't think about where she got the right to do so. Mu Qinghe's expression was solemn. Is there really no way? Chu Luiwei suddenly laughed. I couldn't tell that Vice Admiral Mu is really loyal to the third princess. Mu Qinghe's heart suddenly felt like it was stabbed by something. But I'm very sorry. I really don't have this ability. Why don't you ask those two? Mu Qinghe knew that Chu Luiwei was talking about Lei Laosi and the other two. Not to mention whether they would help, even if they were willing, those two probably wouldn't be able to do it. Otherwise, Lei Laosi wouldn't be in such a sorry state just now. Screech. A clear screech was heard once again. Chu Luiyue immediately turned back to take a look. Currently, half of the feathers on the 9-colored heavenly pheasant had already turned crimson red. Splash, its huge wings suddenly vibrated. In an instant, the wind and clouds surged. The huge Wan Yeshan swayed with the wind. An incomparably thick tree root suddenly rose up from the ground. It slammed toward Shengguan Wan. This tree was the biggest tree in the entire Mystic Sun Forest, and its root naturally couldn't be underestimated. That tree root was so thick that it would take 2 people to wrap their arms around it. Also, it was crystal clear and filled with blood-red liquid. A strong smell of blood spread across the place. Everyone's expression changed simultaneously. Needless to say, Jiang Yuqing and the rest had personally experienced how powerful this tree root was. Third Princess. Wanta. That tree root was about to land on Shengguan Wan. At this moment, Shengguan Wan suddenly seemed to have realized something and looked up. When she saw that thick tree root flying toward her, fear flashed across Shengguan Wan's face. Immediately after, she seemed to have made up her mind, and a ruthless glint flashed across her eyes. I can't care so much anymore. The next moment, Shengguan Wan's aura suddenly surged. She quickly got up and left an afterimage on the spot. Bang! That tree root ruthlessly slammed onto the spot where Shengguan Wan was just now. Countless cracks instantly spread out on the ground. A deep gully appeared in a split second. Shengguan Wan's afterimage was also instantly shattered. However, she was still able to avoid this attack. Chu Luiyue immediately looked over, and his eyes narrowed dangerously. Shengguan Wan's aura was actually still surging rapidly. She was only at peak stage 7 just now, but she actually broke through to stage 8 right now. She reached the same stage as Lei Laosi. A chilly aura emanated from Shengguan Wan's body. In an instant, her face and body were actually covered with a thin layer of frost. Shengguan Wan indeed still held back previously. Just as Chu Luiyue was thinking, he saw Shengguan Wan raise her hand. A sharp white icicle suddenly appeared in her hand. However, in the center of that white icicle, there seemed to be a drop of crimson blood. The terrifying aura was emanating from that drop of blood. Chu Luiyue's heart shuddered. That blood was swoosh. Shengguan Wan had already taken action. She ruthlessly stabbed that icicle into the tree root in front of her. Then she slashed it forcefully. Rip! Blood splattered everywhere. Shengguan Wan's face and body were instantly covered with scarlet bloodstains. It looked eerie and terrifying. However, an even more terrifying scene appeared next. Those bloodstains that splattered on the icicle were actually rapidly absorbed by the icicle. All of them gathered into that drop of blood in the center. From afar, the color of that drop of blood in the center seemed to have become even denser, and it even faintly turned black. Shengguan Wan happened to be holding onto the center of that icicle, so this scene was only seen by Chu Luiyue, who was standing nearby. Chu Luiyue only felt a chill run up from the bottom of his feet. There's something wrong with that icicle. Her gaze shifted slightly, and she looked at Shengguan Wan again. However, she shockingly discovered that her injuries were recovering at a speed visible to the naked eye. Mobile users, please browse and read. A more high-quality reading experience comes from Love Network. Chapter 713. At this moment, Shengguan Wan completely ignored the gazes of the outside world. She held the icicle and looked at the blood-red liquid flowing all over the roots in front of her. She was pleasantly surprised. The thick smell of blood spread, and it was nauseating. However, this smell made Shengguan Wan even more excited. This Wan Yeshan indeed lives by consuming human blood. The biggest one in the middle should be the mother tree of all the Wan Yeshan in the Mystic Forest. If I control this Wan Yeshan, doesn't that mean all those people who are still trapped underground will be mine? This would be many times more convenient than my previous plan. Screech. A painful shriek was heard. Chu Luiyue quickly looked up and saw that the remaining half of the 9-colored heavenly pheasant's feathers didn't turn red for a long time. Even the parts that had turned red started to turn back to their original colors. Chu Luiyue's heart sank harshly. Could this be the sign of a failed breakthrough? It hovered in midair and flapped its wings anxiously. Chu Luiyue clearly saw that the red color on one of its wings that had just transformed was gradually fading. The most important thing was that the rolling dark clouds in the sky were also showing signs of dissipating and were gradually drifting in all directions. Even if Chu Luiyue hadn't seen the scene of a 9th-grade fiend breaking through to a mythical beast, he knew one thing. Under normal circumstances, the phenomenon would only disappear after a successful breakthrough. But now, the 9-colored heavenly pheasant was only halfway through its breakthrough, and it actually started. This could only prove that Chu Luiyue's guess wasn't wrong. He didn't know what problem the 9-colored heavenly pheasant encountered, but it was stuck at this last stage. If it couldn't successfully break through to become a mythical beast this time, the 9-colored heavenly pheasant's abilities would decrease greatly. There was even a possibility that it wouldn't be able to break through to become a mythical beast in this lifetime. Chu Luiyue's heart sank to the bottom of the valley. "Big brother, what's going on? Is that fellow going to fail?" The others below also noticed that something was amiss, and their expressions changed. A hint of panic flashed past Lei Laoxi's eyes as he looked at his big brother. How could this be? For such a long time, we have been watching carefully, not leaving each other's side at all. There have been no mistakes at all. Logically speaking, it should be able to succeed. One must know that the 9-colored heavenly pheasant had been in a deep slumber for close to 2 years. It was its own choice to break through to Divine Beast today. If it didn't have absolute confidence, it wouldn't have done that. Nothing is absolute. The man's expression was calm as his long and narrow eyes narrowed slightly. The probability of a 9th-grade magical beast successfully breaking through to become a divine beast is actually less than half. Besides, moreover, this 9-colored heavenly pheasant was very different from other 9th-grade magical beasts. Lei Laoxi was speechless, and his face was a little pale. This is that person's magical beast. How could her magical beast fail? Back then, the fact that it was able to survive in such a desperate situation was already enough to explain many things. At the very least, he had never thought of a second possibility other than success. Let's wait and see. The dark clouds haven't completely dispersed yet. Until then, there was still time. Lei Laoxi held the hammer in his hands tightly and looked up anxiously. "Anyway, I think it will definitely work," he muttered to himself as if he was convincing himself and also as if it was some kind of firm obsession. Why is the 9-colored heavenly pheasant's color changing back again? Mu Hongyu exclaimed. Yi Ranran furrowed his brows, and his face was solemn. "I'm afraid, not good. How can it be so easy to break through to become a divine beast? You're saying that it's going to fail?" Mu Hongyu was still in disbelief. That 9-colored heavenly pheasant was clearly fine just now. Could it be that even such a powerful 9th-grade magical beast couldn't successfully cross that threshold? The golden mane bear cub suddenly appeared in Mu Hongyu's arms again. Mu Hongyu's arms sank, and she hurriedly hugged it. "Song Song, what are you doing?" She thought that it was frightened by the commotion, but after the golden mane bear cub came out, it just stayed in her arms obediently and looked at the 9-colored heavenly pheasant in the sky with a nervous expression. Mu Hongyu didn't understand what was going on. Why does Song Song look like? Not only is it not afraid, but it's also very worried about that 9-colored heavenly pheasant? Mu Qinghe also looked up, but he quickly retracted his gaze and looked at Shangguan Wan again with a solemn expression. When Shangguan Wan attacked just now, there seemed to be something wrong. "Your Highness." The moment he spoke, he heard a gust of wind by his ear. A green figure flashed past his eyes rapidly. He was shocked. Hong Yao. Hong Yao turned around and glanced at him, but it didn't stop. While green flames quickly ignited on its body. Its aura increased rapidly. Mu Qinghe's expression changed slightly. What is it planning to do? Hong Yao, come here. He scolded sternly. Hong Yao flapped its wings and flew toward the nine-colored heavenly pheasant that was hovering in midair. Mu Qinghe was about to chase after it when he suddenly heard a loud sound. Boom! He turned around and saw that the ground in front of Shangguan had suddenly collapsed. The ravine was so deep that the bottom couldn't be seen. Jiang Yuqing also noticed the commotion here. His expression changed drastically, and he immediately went forward. At this moment, a tree root swept over. Shangguan actually jumped down. "Your Highness! Want to?" Shangguan's figure instantly disappeared in front of everyone. "It's so dangerous down there. Why is she still going down?" Almost at the same time, Chu Luiyue tapped her toes and shot into the sky like an arrow. She was actually going for the nine-colored heavenly pheasant. Lu Yu, Mu Hongyu and the rest were shocked. The nine-colored heavenly pheasant was about to fail its breakthrough, and its aura was already surging. Wasn't she courting death by going over at this moment? Chu Luiyue turned a deaf ear to these voices. She suddenly raised her aura, and her speed became even faster. At this moment, only the area around the nine-colored heavenly pheasant's head was left red. The rest of its body had turned colorful again. However, although it was colorful, it was very different from the luxurious and beautiful appearance from before. Upon closer inspection, its body seemed to be covered with a layer of dust. Its entire body was gray and lifeless. Chu Luiyue's heart felt as if it was pierced by a sharp blade. It was painful. She gritted her teeth and charged over without a care. The nine-colored heavenly pheasant seemed to have sensed someone approaching and flapped its wings alertly. The fierce and chaotic power transformed into streams of light and scattered in all directions. Many wounds were quickly left on Chu Luiyue's body. However, she was still moving forward. She directly arrived in front of the nine-colored heavenly pheasant. Screech! The nine-colored heavenly pheasant flapped its wings and instantly surrounded Chu Luiyue's figure. A vast and mighty pressure descended. A chilling, murderous aura enveloped her. Chu Luiyue's clothes and long black hair fluttered in the wind. The biting cold aura approached, and its sharp claws pierced her neck. Dark red blood instantly gushed out. Chu Luiyue's eyes were red, but she was persistent and firm. She said, "Xiaojiu, I'm back. You come back too, okay?" Her voice was so soft that it could be easily blown away by the wind. However, the nine-colored heavenly pheasant heard it. Its eyes, which had been closed all this time, finally opened. Amidst the dull gray color, a gorgeous, colorful light suddenly erupted. Dark clouds gathered in the sky again. Boiling hot and sparkling tears fell from its magnificent eyes. "Master summons. My return. Digression. Today is even more over. Tomorrow at 12 a.m. Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from Love Network." Chapter 714. The blood that gushed out from Chu Luiyue's neck was quickly absorbed by the nine-colored heavenly pheasant. The crimson-red claws became even brighter. As though it was suddenly injected with abundant energy, the nine-colored heavenly pheasant let out a clear cry. Screech! This cry was different from the painful cry from before. It was melodious, nostalgic, joyful. It was the joy of finally seeing hope after enduring a long wait. In those countless dark days, it was chaotic, lost, and lonely. Now it could finally meet again. The layer of gray on the nine-colored heavenly pheasant's body quickly faded. The feathers all over its body became bright again. Then, a smear of red spread rapidly. Those colorful feathers started to turn red at a speed visible to the naked eye. Only that pair of eyes were like magnificent rainbow-colored crystals, dazzling and brilliant. Dark clouds rolled in the surroundings, and the wind whistled. However, the space surrounded by the nine-colored heavenly pheasant's wings was incomparably quiet and peaceful. The vast pressure on Chu Luiyue instantly dissipated. Chu Luiyue suddenly felt something pushing her from behind. It was the nine-colored heavenly pheasant's wings. She was even closer to it, so close that she could see her own reflection in that pair of gem-like eyes. Chu Liwei slowly stretched out her hand and wiped away its tears. She couldn't be more familiar with that gaze. It's Dumpling. It's little Nine again. There's Dumpling's coquettish nostalgia and little Nine's unparalleled nobility. Chu Liwei choked and her voice trembled slightly. You're little Nine, and also Dumpling, right? The nine-colored heavenly pheasant lowered its head and leaned close to her cheek, gently rubbing against it. Chu Liwei closed her eyes, and hot tears fell silently. Even though she already had some guesses in her heart still couldn't help but tremble when she received a definite answer. She had regained what she had lost. Perhaps there was nothing in the world that could make her feel more fortunate and happy than this. Chu Liue's chest seemed to be filled with something, and surprise and nostalgia almost overflowed from the depths of her heart. It's still here, it's back. She once thought that she had lost everything. It was still waiting for her. Chu Liue opened his bloodshot eyes. The nine-colored heavenly pheasant carefully wiped away the tears on her face. Chu Liue looked at it. In an instant, many things flashed through his mind. Now that the truth was out, it was as if there was an invisible string that connected all those things together. Dumpling stubbornly brought her here, that colorful barrier, Lei Laosi and the other two in charge of guarding. Chu Liue couldn't help but laugh. So it really was the two of them. Previously, she didn't dare to believe it. After all, from all aspects, the two of them were too different from before. Chu Liue's expression froze. Ever since she obtained this black pyramid, it had only produced an obvious movement in the Tianling God realm once. The rest of the time, there was no movement. That time, it opened the door to the Long Yuan sword. What was it this time? Little Nine crazily swallowed the surrounding heaven and earth energy, and the aura on its body continued to rise. The fluctuations were endless. The sound was earth-shattering. Everything within a radius of dozens of miles had been affected by this powerful energy. An extremely crisp sound was heard. Upon hearing that, Chu Liue looked up and saw that the top of the barrier suddenly shattered. Numerous cracks instantly crawled all over the transparent barrier like a spiderweb. This barrier is going to break. Retreat. Lei Laosi, who had been watching the situation closely, immediately yelled when he saw the situation. The man standing beside him moved swiftly. His movements were graceful, and in the blink of an eye, he had retreated quite a distance. At the same time, he waved his sleeves and brought Chang Wanzhou and the other two, who were still rooted to the ground, over. Chang Wanzhou reacted the fastest. He instinctively wanted to draw his sword but shockingly realized that his body couldn't move at all. It wasn't until they were all brought to that man's side that the unknown restraining force on their bodies finally disappeared. The few of them had just stood still, and before they could say anything, they saw the transparent barrier shattering. With that tree as the center, a horrifying force crazily engulfed the surroundings. The ground was lifted up continuously. Broken wood and dust scattered everywhere. At the same time, the tail of the nine-colored heavenly pheasant in the sky finally started to transform. Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from Love Network. Chapter 7:15. When Mu Qinghe heard Lei Laosi's shouts, she immediately retreated and summoned Hong Yao back at the same time. However, it seemed to be at odds with the nine-colored heavenly pheasant as it refused to move. Mu Qinghe frowned and pondered as she blocked the surrounding turbulence. Is Hong Yao acting like this because it's worried about Chu Liue or because of the nine-colored heavenly pheasant? Other than the one back then, there's almost no one else that can make Hong Yao so persistent. Could it be that it's hostile towards the entire nine-colored heavenly pheasant race? Mu Qinghe didn't dare to confirm her guess. From this position, she could vaguely see Chu Liue's sleeves, but she couldn't see anything else. However, judging from the current situation, even though Chu Liue was trapped by the nine-colored heavenly pheasant, he didn't seem to be in much danger for the time being. Jianghu Yuqing and Elder Qiushi were both forced to retreat. Because Elder Qiushi was standing in front and was responsible for protecting Jianghu Yuqing, he suffered quite a bit of injuries. However, Jiang Yuqing's current feelings were very complicated. Shangguan Wan went underground again. She clearly knew that it was that terrifying black swamp below, so why did she still go down? According to Jiang Yuqing's understanding of Shangguan Wan's character, since she did this, it must be to achieve one of her goals. What exactly is it? Suddenly, Jiang Yuqing's heart skipped a beat. Could it be that Shangguan Wan is targeting those people trapped under Wan Yeshan? Once this thought popped up, it couldn't be dismissed. Jiang Yuqing clenched his fists and furrowed his brows. Shangguan Wan is definitely capable of doing such a thing. After all, she came here this time for this matter. She actually gave up on her previous plan and chose this method. Recalling the thick and plump roots that looked like they were filled with blood, Jiang Yuqing's entire body turned numb. However, he was more worried. Jumping down in front of so many people, isn't she afraid of being exposed? She was really crazy. If Shangguan Wan knew what Jiang Yuqing was thinking at this time, she would definitely sneer at him. He wasn't the one whose Yuan meridian was crippled. He wasn't the one who was completely crippled. Of course he couldn't understand her feelings. Moreover, at that time, she had already been forced to the point where she had no way out. This was the only path she could take. Even if Shangguan Wan was given another 100 chances, she would still make the same choice. As for whether or not it would be discovered, she had done even more daring things, let alone this. As long as the method was in place, nothing would be a problem. I wonder how the third princess is doing, Elder Qiushi said worriedly. Jiang Yuqing looked up at the sky. Chu Liwei seemed to be trapped by the 9-colored heavenly pheasant. However, the strange thing was that the 9-colored heavenly pheasant was on the verge of failure just now. Its aura was in a frenzy, and it had almost lost its rationality. Under that kind of situation, it actually didn't take Chu Liu's life. Moreover, after Chu Liu left, the 9-colored heavenly pheasant somehow regained its strength. Now, it was only one step away from success. Just now, what exactly happened? Boom, boom, boom. An even stronger wave came. Everyone looked up at the same time. A bright red flame suddenly appeared at the tail of the 9-colored heavenly pheasant. This light was like a knife that tore the dark sky apart. It was dazzling and eye-catching. A terrifying pressure that caused one's heart to palpitate spread out from its body. Everyone was dumbfounded as they tried to explain. That was a phoenix tail. Red-tailed red phoenix. The 9-colored heavenly pheasant had successfully broken through to become a red-tailed red phoenix. Red-tailed red phoenix. Isn't this the existence whose bloodline power is the closest to the crimson gold heavenly phoenix in the rumors? The crimson gold heavenly phoenix was one of the 2 great primordial divine beasts, along with the great void phoenix dragon. Rumor had it that there were many types below the crimson gold heavenly phoenix. Among them, the red-tailed red phoenix was the most noble. The 9-colored heavenly pheasant wasn't considered the top 9th-grade fiend in this lineage. Although everyone expected it to break through and become a phoenix, they didn't expect it to jump 3 grades and forcefully become a red-tailed red phoenix. Even Chu Liwei was stunned. She was full of expectations for Little Nine's breakthrough, but she had never imagined that it could become a red-tailed red phoenix. Back then, before she got into trouble, Little Nine already had signs of breaking through. However, at that time, the bloodline power in its body wasn't as dense as it was now. Otherwise, Chu Liwei wouldn't have mistaken Little Nine's identity after smelling that fragrance. What exactly had it experienced in the past 2 years? One had to know that the bloodline power in a fiend's body was basically fixed from birth. To strengthen it was as difficult as ascending to the heavens. Chu Liwei was sure that if it wasn't for the rich bloodline power in its body, it definitely wouldn't be able to break through and become a red-tailed red phoenix. Countless fragments of the barrier floated over, transforming into streams of light and entering Little Nine's body. It slowly closed its eyes. Chu Liu's heart stirred. She suddenly looked up and frowned. The dark clouds in the sky hadn't dispersed yet. What was going on? Little Nine had already successfully broken through. Logically speaking, the clouds should have dispersed. Suddenly, a fluctuation came from Chu Liu's dantian. It was that black pyramid. Chu Luiyue immediately focused. Crack. A small crack suddenly appeared on that black seal. That crack was extremely small. If one didn't observe carefully, it would be impossible to notice it. However, Chu Luiyue's heart immediately jumped. The sealing power of this barrier was extremely strong. Back then, even Taizu couldn't open it. Now, it actually cracked open by itself? A brilliant light shone out from within. Chu Luiyue held her breath. Then, she felt as if something was flowing out from that crack. Chu Luiyue looked carefully and was surprised to find that it was a ball of faint golden mist. After it floated out, before Chu Luiyue could see it clearly, that ball of golden mist quietly dissipated. In an instant, it disappeared without a trace. Chu Luiyue was confused. What was that? She still hadn't told us. A huge roar suddenly reverberated in her mind. Chu Luiyue hugged her head. She was in extreme pain. It was as if someone was holding an axe and madly chopping at her head, trying to split it open. Ah! Chu Luiyue cried out in pain. Almost at the same time, the feathers on Little Nine's head flashed with a brilliant golden color. Its wings suddenly flapped. Then, the golden light quickly disappeared. It sank into its crimson feathers. Its movements were extremely fast, and all of this happened too suddenly, so no one noticed it at all. Everyone's attention was attracted by Chu Luiyue's cry of surprise. Chu Luiyue hugged her head tightly with both hands. In an instant, countless images flashed through her mind. Finally, one image froze. It was still that cliff. It was still that octagonal pavilion. It was still that man in the black brocade robe. Chu Luiyue's heart suddenly jumped. She seemed to have a premonition. This time, the man turned his face to the side and chuckled in her direction. He was lazy and noble. Come here. Digression, Khan is so painful. It's so slow. There's still 6 chapters left. I don't know if I can add more chapters. Just pretend I didn't say anything. Mobile phone users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from Love Network. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Immortal Journey YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.